was over there last week. I was like, oh, that. I was out on the back. All right. Well, today we got 3 things today on the study session. The update on the Safe Routes to School plan, school area traffic control policy, and the Lawrence Bike Plan. And so I think Jessica's going to start by going over the Lawrence Bike Plan. So.
I can do them in any order. Whatever. Okay, let's do that. Okay. It's the most, probably the longest. Right, so we wanted to take this opportunity to introduce to you the draft bike plan that's currently out for public comment until June 14th. I believe 13th or 14th, now that I think about my exact dates. But just to, this is really high-level concepts I want to introduce to you because it's a little bit different than what we have in the existing plan, and it makes changes to things. But we went through the process of updating the plan because we identified the need that we needed to reconcile all of the various bicycle-related plans, whether that be the Lawrence Loop Alignment Study, the Ped Bike Issues Task Force Report, and the existing countywide Bikeway Plan. And as we started through this process, it became clear that there were some conflicting recommendations and just some inconsistencies between those plans that we wanted to bring together for one unified vision for Lawrence. We really had the concept and construct to talk about low-stress bikeways, of which the current, some of those current plans didn't recognize all of the current design standards available. And so we wanted to make sure that we've established criteria kind of for bikeways based on best practices and national best standards that we can't always detail at the time of the plan, but that need to be more context sensitive and evolve as the process develops for designing and implementing the bikeway. We really felt like there needed to be a more holistic, also 5Es approach to not just building infrastructure, but also thinking about education, encouragement, enforcement, and evaluation. And then in the trend of working towards performance-based planning and being able to tell the story better about where we are and where we intend to go, we really wanted to establish performance measures that could allow us to provide some data that we could collect both as baseline, but also to track the changes that are happening in our community over time. We talked to a lot of people in the plan development process through 2 surveys and numerous open house events. When we first started the process, it was a countywide plan we were going to write, and we determined that it would be more appropriate for us to write a Lawrence-specific plan and then a county plan. And so this is the Lawrence plan. We'll be continuing to work on the Douglas County plan, which the routes interconnectivity will connect, but it will allow us to dedicate some additional time in Baldwin City and Eudora to do some stuff. So people told us their case for bicycling, but I think nationally we follow the trend, and we heard a lot of sentiments related to health and environment, people's mobility and ability to access services and resources in the community, a lot about safety, and then also thinking about the economic impact that bicycling can have and the economy related to car ownership and access to employment or education. In that public comment opportunity from our round of surveys, we asked people if they would ride their bike more often if they felt they could do so safely, because safety is the number one concern we often hear and why people don't want to ride the bike. It was the number one reason that prevented respondents from bicycling more was aggressive and speeding drivers. And that was over 300 respondents, followed by weather, which we have less opportunity to control. So we really felt like that the context of what we're talking about in terms of design needs to reflect back to this context of people's perception about safety. We also asked people how bicycle transportation should be prioritized in relationship to other modes. And you can see that 3/4 of respondents in our process told us that it should be equally prioritized with other modes of travel. So. And a majority, and I will say a majority of these people reported that driving a car is their primary mode. Although I would say we probably got people on more opposite, on ends of the spectrum in terms of people who decided to engage in our process and take our survey through all of our tabling and engagement work. But when we talk about level of comfort bicycling, 38% of cyclists were interested in bicycling but concerned about safety. And this is where we talk about that predominance of safety. And so we asked people, and you don't have to read all these results, but it kind of tells the context for where we're going, where we're looking at level of comfort on different facility types. So this was on neighborhood streets and people's different comfort level or less comfort on neighborhood streets where they're not protected. And then if you look at commercial streets, you can see on the far right, protected bicycle lanes or cycle track, kind of as that highest level of comfort with the concerned interest parties. So this information feeds into the matrix that we built for level of comfort. You can see it on the maps we provided in the handout also if you'd like to look at it in more detail for the networks. But it really feeds into kind of the vision that we set for looking at safety. So when you look at our actual baseline statistics in 2006 and 2007, there were 0 reported bicycle fatalities or serious injuries. So the vision is to work on and continue to improve safety and continue the 0 number. We didn't have 2018 data at the time. We should be getting that in the next month. It takes us about 6 months after the year to get that data. We looked at ridership and increasing ridership as a goal of the plan to increase bicycle mode share. Currently, that's at 1% plus or minus 0.4% as of 2017. The bike to school percentage, we hope to increase to 5%. As of 2018, that was at 3%. That was just the bike percentage, not bike and walking. The walking percentage is quite a lot higher. And then we talked about increasing access. So increasing the percentage of the population within a quarter mile of a bike facility that's at level of comfort 3 and higher. So that's not every existing facility that we have. It's the ones that meet the standard in the matrix of 3 and higher. And we'll look at that a little bit later on the map. Currently that's at 75%. And the goal within the plan range is to get to 85%. So that talks a little bit about where you are impacting choices to where you build stuff, but also the comfort level of what you're building. Increase the network of low-stress bikeways, so increase the network of low-stress bikeways to 46%. Currently, that's at 42% as of 2018. And then achieve level of American Bicyclist Silver level bicycle-friendly community or higher by 2025. So those are kind of the framework that lays out a lot of the action and recommendations in this plan. It's the most specific performance-based plan that we've had to look at specific measures and set goals that are this specific. So it also allows us to track data and hopefully target approaches to address some of these goal areas. So out of that, the action plan and a lot of what we talked about is not only just built environment, but also the other components of that. So talking about continuing to incorporate and build on safe routes to school and bikeways, continuing to build on education and encouragement like bike maps and bicycle-friendly driver training as well as other education. Looking at planning and budgeting for maintenance and asset management and implementation of bikeways. And then also other things like, we just talked about all the evaluation that comes out of Safe Routes to School, part of the League of American Bicyclists applications, and other performance-based plans. But this approach really looked at a framework to take advantage of opportunities to target more than just built environment approaches to implementing the Bikeway Plan. And this, you can see nicely, has a champion, partners, and other partners. That's also the first time in a plan we've called out responsibility for each of these tasks, which will hope with accountability and being very clear about the expectations of whose role it is to kind of lay out the role of this work, because it doesn't all fall on the Metropolitan Planning Organization or the city or the health department or the county sustainability staff. It's a lot of collaboration between all of the entities working together to achieve kind of the visions of this plan, including some, the Transportation Commission listed as other partners, and also other community groups and their roles and responsibilities in some of these. Okay, so you also have the map on the table if you'd like to look at it up closer in more detail. This is the proposed existing and planned network. It has the blue lines on here are the priority funding network, which makes a little bit of changes from the priority network that you maybe have seen before. And it's added a secondary network to kind of fill in the grid for a second priority. And we can talk about and decide later when we talk about non-motorized prioritization how that plays into this. But we thought it would be important to call out a kind of hierarchy in those prioritization networks. You'll notice all of the future planned facilities are just called future bikeways. That's because in the previous plan we found that the designations given in the planning process weren't necessarily appropriate to the context of the street, to the existing land use happening on it, or the development scale and scope available for that project. So for example, it could have had future bike lanes on a street where you would have literally had to tear down houses to reconstruct a street to put in bike lanes. And so we realized that all of these streets and their design and implementation is so context sensitive. And it really comes into play that, before we would have said, oh, bike lanes on all of these street facilities. It was shared use path, bike lanes, or bike route. And we now know also we have a lot more diversity in bike facility type. And so that's kind of impacted our conversation around not calling out future facility types by a set facility. That then comes into play because if you don't call in to that future facility type, we have this level of comfort map, which is on the other side of your handout. But basically, this is the current assessment based on posted speeds and average daily auto trips for the street network. And there's a matrix based on each facility type based on speed and volume. That correlates with different level of comforts. So you can see there are existing facilities like on Wakarusa or on Bob Billings that are not as comfortable as other facilities we've built, like a facility on Mass Street that's buffered. And all of that relates back to the facility type, even if there's no facility type, and the speed and volume of the roadway. This map, you can see, doesn't have all of the street network. We were very limited in what we had available data for. And so our hope is that part of the neighborhood traffic management program and the data collection throughout of speed and volume information of neighborhoods would make this a living model, just like prioritization policy has the living model behind it, where this is going to need to constantly be fed information from our other processes to continue to grow the level of streets that have rated level of comfort and or update the level of comfort based on changes that are happening based on speed and volume and other policy changes that might impact that. But this context really then does say, so when you're going to design a bikeway, how you would use this is you decide to prioritize a project, or you're doing a street, if the city's doing a street construction project, you look at the map, what is it currently rated, you look at the facility types you're proposing, and you can look at the level of comfort assessment score that we've given based on whatever proposed facility. So you can then have a metrics, kind of a data-driven conversation about if this facility type we could do for this dollar value, it has this score, this is the cost it would be to get to the next one or down one, and we can start to provide kind of some more meaningful contextual information to level of comfort that we haven't been able to before when we talk about facility selection in a project. As a result of that, also in the appendices, we've written a bikeway design guide with a toolbox of just context-sensitive design criteria that hopes to supplement the plan in an effort to kind of create more options and to guide the public process and the engineers in selecting appropriate facility types. It's very graphic oriented if you look at the plan in terms of it takes from a lot of national tools that do design and criteria and puts it together in the context of our community with some facility selection criteria based on all of those national best practices, kind of for appropriate speed and volume of facility types. So this is what you can consult in terms of this and level of comfort to kind of see where you fall in terms of basically what the speed and volume of the street are now versus what you're proposing designing it as and how that all fits together in relation to level of comfort. Like I mentioned, the Bikeway Plan is out for public comment, so I'd encourage you to look at it. We'll be going through that process and collecting all the comments that we receive about the plan to respond to those in that process with working with the MPO Bicycle Advisory Committee to sort through and make final recommended changes to the draft plan. We will then go through the process of taking that to the MPO Bicycle Advisory Committee, the MPO Policy Board. It'll come back to the Transportation Commission and then to the City Commission as we look at adopting and moving forward with the Bikeway Plan that's been developed over the last year. So, Kathryn, do you have anything to add about? Kathryn served as I'm throwing you out there. She wasn't even prepared for that. But she served as the liaison for Transportation Commission through this plan development process working with the MPO BAC.
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
On the visual slide, I don't know if you can pull that up real quick. Maybe you don't really need to, but the percentages that I see there, it seemed like kind of low, like 3% and 5%. And I know numbers don't tell the whole story, so, I get that, but I'm wondering not only how those numbers were arrived at, but are there is there comfort level data for cities like Davis and Fort Collins and, something you could say, oh gee, this is where they've been or where they are and how they got there and what would be reasonable for us to
So this was challenging, and we talked about it with the MPO BAC and multiple times as we kind of worked through this process to figure out what the right numbers were. The bike percentage mode of choice, that's American Community Survey data from the U.S. Census. So that's going to be travel tally information. So that's really talking about people's commute to work. In terms of the information that the census is collecting. And so those national scales are really challenging and hard to make movement on, where, the MPO BAC had a conversation, is 3% too aggressive? The bike to school percentage, which is currently 3% with the goal to get it to 5%, in some of the percentage increases based on where the safe routes to school planning process has been in moving bike and walk percentages, the amounts and percentages that they've moved, we felt that was still pretty ambitious, but yet achievable goal in some of that. That's going to really, though, some of this all, in terms of those goals, if you spend all your money on that, could you maybe move one metric more than if you were looking at all of them in terms of some of that? In terms of the level of comfort model, there are other level of comfort models. They're all a little bit different. And there's not a there's bicycle level of service, but some of that exceeds past what we have the capacity to do in terms of some of the modeling capacity right now. So we're trying to build a model that fits the context of what we're trying to talk about, which is designing future infrastructure and assessing current level of comfort. So there's other ones that are level of traffic stress and other things, but there's not necessarily a way to compare these like, we're at this percent, this city's at this other percent, based on the model and the planning process that
So they
we've
don't do
developed.
similar surveys? in
Oh, you
terms
mean
of-
the percentage
Well,
people's
maybe not the
comfort?
percentage, the comfort
Maybe.
level. you
Maybe,
know, Yeah,
maybe. I don't know of any specifically off the bat from like people's perception of comfort
Mhm.
level in terms of that.
and you said you want to be able to measure all of this. Are you going to look at it yearly or kind
Yeah,
of?
so one of the things that we'll do as part of the MPO process is one of the things we wanted to make sure that we had metrics that really fit in line with the long-range transportation plan, Transportation 2040. And so some of these metrics are data that we're collecting regardless annually, and they're just a different perspective on that same data and information.
Okay.
So like the crash data is something we report on regardless for bike ped together, so we've just said bike separately in this. So we would anticipate that this, yes, would be, we're gonna have to figure out the timeline of some of that data, like when, if it's a one point in time thing or we update it as you go, but ideally that then you would be able to tell this story on an annual basis or at least get updated numbers.
Okay,
This area that's down by Pascal has a secondary funding network that looks like it goes north toward Mass and then cuts across on, I'm assuming 21st Street, and then comes back down. And I'm wondering if someone were going this 27th to 23rd connection, why they wouldn't prefer to go along the shorter route that is also identified but not part of the secondary funding network.
You mean, if you would just connect that?
It kind of like, why would we prioritize the funding going kind of jogging up and then over and down rather than just the shorter distance that's identified as a future bikeway? It just feels like if you were on the ground doing that,
Sure.
you would, like, so I'm
I
not
will
sure.
have to look back to, I was looking to see if Amanda was in the room because we've had staff conversations about that. Do you remember specifically, David?
Is it that one?
It's really the,
Here, let me see if I can.
And yeah, there's a dot.
right here, it feels like you're really close to connecting,
Oh, yeah, okay.
but it's not considered a secondary funding, so I
This
assume
part,
that kind of becomes then tertiary. I'm
Yeah.
just wondering, like, the amount of money it would take to do that
portion.
jogging all the way north and then over and then down.
Yeah,
It would be better just to try to connect.
Mhm.
you would still have a yeah, you'd have to come back down on the other side probably and cross under 23rd Street. But yeah. I don't at this point have that answer for that conversation. It was also about connecting back to the north.
To Mass Street.
Yeah.
There were some challenges in there because one of the existing plans had drawn some alignments that were literally across personal property that were not going to be very realistic.
Is that future bikeway dash line, is that across personal property?
I don't believe these current ones should be. They should be on either on streets or in areas that aren't like a house is there. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's not a matter of is the dash line in the right spot, it's really why,
Yes.
Why is the yellow-
priority
The
line,
yellow
the
line.
secondary
yeah,
priority?
because it feels like we could make a bigger connection for those folks traveling on 27th to get over to 23rd. And to have to go across 23rd and then come back around, it just seems a little unusual to do that. Like, I likely wouldn't do that, I'd probably just follow the road or whatever it is that's there,
Sure.
so.
What are we doing as far as education for the cyclists? Getting back to this comfort thing. Cyclists now are in survival mode, so they don't necessarily follow the old streets of the road, and I don't even know if those are valid anymore. Are we doing anything to update our ordinances, monitor the trouble spots? I don't wanna put anybody out in the traffic if it's dangerous. For example, every time I come to City Hall, there's always a cyclist living around the corner on the sidewalk. does that cyclist have an alternative, or is that one of the comfort zone issues? Ideally, we'd like them to be following some sort of standards when they're traveling around the city, but everything is lost. Everybody's fending for themselves, cyclists, pedestrians, everyone's fending for themselves. We need to start straightening it up. And I have no idea where to begin. I see things that shouldn't be happening, but I understand why they're happening.
I think the challenge is reaching some of those people. So the city has made over the last 5 years some concerted efforts and partnerships through safe routes with childhood education for cycling, the bike lessons and safety education. We worked in collaboration with the health department to train through the league certified League Association of American League of Bicyclists, the league certified instructors. And the 4 times a year, Parks and Rec hosts competent, capable commuter classes. We've partnered with the KU Bicycle Advisory Committee and worked with some of those league instructors on working on education placards and introductory bike rides. And I mean, there's a lot of things I think happening.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is at what point, it's still.
Talking about this corner is a good example of as a cyclist. When I come through here, if I'm going to go north across the bridge, I will take the sidewalk from there, because coming around this curve and then trying to cross the bridge with the traffic turning left or coming across is too scary. But if I'm going over to the now submerged river trail, I don't want to get on the sidewalk, because when I try to cross over where people are coming off the bridge or going onto the bridge, they're not looking for cyclists at all, and I'm better off in the street trying to get across this intersection that way and then turn onto that path. And so you're right, it is everybody fending for themselves, because there are no norms, and I don't have any confidence that the automobile traffic is being monitored or,
And of course,
or
my
watching
own
out.
standby as an example is 23rd Street. If you're driving on 23rd Street and on the other side of the street, a cyclist is on the sidewalk and they're not stopping at curb cuts, and you try to turn, they're at total shock. They're in your blind spot. They should be over here if they're going with the traffic. We need to sort this out somehow. I don't have any suggestions, I'm just saying.
Yeah. And I think
it's kind of a free for all.
And I think it's kind of a multifaceted approach in terms of providing education, introducing education and enforcement in a meaningful way, possibly. Clear markings, better facilities in places, better routing for people. I mean,
Chime in on this one. I think we've been on the borough's trail the last 5 years a lot. All the way from, Hobbs to 27th to 31st. And in the last couple of years, I would say 5 years ago, if you're on the Burroughs Trail and you're crossing 11th, 13th, 15th, 19th, those primary spots, 5 years ago, I'd say 2 or 3 out of 10 cars would stop if they saw a biker. Not because of the lights or anything. I'd be interested if you have the same perception. But anyway, 2 or 3 5 years ago is now 6 or 7. Really. And it's not, I don't even push the buttons anymore because it annoys the cars. And most of them are going to stop. So my point is, I think things are improving in terms of
With increased visibility.
culture, a lot of these high-level things we talk about. It's slow. And Carol's point is well taken, but I don't know if you're out there as much as some of us are, you do see some real positive change. It's real tiny, but I'm really impressed with what I see.
But then, and this is where it gets to education, a lot of the pedestrians, a cyclist is coming up and you're saying, I'm on your left, I'm passing, don't know what that means in there. I don't know whether I want, if I say something, sometimes I startle people and they feel like I'm going to run into them, but I don't want to surprise them by going around them. And so, I know there are signs up that explain sort of the rules of the road on the trails, but they're not consistent. They're not consistent with cyclists, and a lot of pedestrians don't know what they are, and there are still a lot of loose dogs.
Mhm.
I also worry
Makes me
about
crazy.
the cyclists who are really looking for a place to, more of a race track. I don't know what, there must be some kind of name for it, because I'm sure it's a sport of some sort. And it goes through a residential neighborhood, mainly ours, on a street where there's a school. We have actually had an accident, that little green bar that Charlie pointed out to the right of Louisiana Street, with a car that was cutting through the neighborhood and a cyclist that was cutting through the neighborhood. And the cyclist bounced off the hood of the car. So when we do these, is this for all cyclists? Are these for the cyclists who are out for pleasure? How are we going to sort this out?
Well, I think this plan calls for building facilities and particularly infrastructure that is comfortable for more types of cyclists. So I would say oftentimes the cyclists who are out riding for sport or recreation, they fall into the category, they're gonna ride no matter what. I mean, they're riding out there now, even though other people have a perception that the safety level is not good. And so I think as you continue to make streets more comfortable, you get a more diverse type of cyclists. And each kind of has different desires and needs in terms of targeting education and
I think
encouragement.
One of the things you're saying is like, what would be a speed limit on these shared use paths? Because, you know, if I'm out and it's early in the morning and there's no one else out there, I will go faster. But when it's Saturday morning and people are out with strollers and dogs and other cyclists, then I will go slower, because at that point it's a means for me to get from this side of town to the other side of town, so I can go out on the roads and go fast, you know. But a lot of cyclists don't do that. A lot of them go too fast on this, and I can see where being a pedestrian is frightening at that point. So it can get very crowded, and I'm sure even on these protected areas, there are some rules of the road that are not clear to people.
I'm very intimidated by the sport, by the 25 mile per hour bikers on the shared use path. And they're there, and boy, it's scary. And there aren't that many, but it's a judgment thing. I don't know how you really control that by infrastructure other than signage and common sense, but
Well, there was a place that was all around the city, like the Lawrence Loop, for example. It would be much easier for them to attain high speeds at a long distance rather than having to go through neighborhoods to get from place to place on the Lawrence Loop.
But
It's
that's what
much
we're
more.
talking about, is the Lawrence Loop.
Well, and also the whole bike infrastructure plan, right? I mean, at this point, anything with a bike lane is easier to bike on than a street. But if you're going for exercise, having to stop every couple blocks is a huge inconvenience if you're trying to get up any kind of speed. I'm not saying that's the only use of bike, right? I mean, it's supposed to be for diverse users. But in terms of getting the dangerously fast exercise bikers off the streets where everybody else might be using for commuting, the Lawrence Loop is hopefully going to be that big key, I think. But just my opinion.
you probably have bikers speeding just like you have cars speeding.
Sure.
We do.
Or walkers not paying attention. I mean,
Yeah.
every class of transportation has bad actors. So.
No, and when I
Some
wanna
are
go
more
at
dangerous.
dangerous speeds, I get off all of this grid.
Right. Yeah.
Where I can be hit by a massive truck.
Well, gee, let's,
I have a question
We
about
could-
the difference between the priority funding network and secondary funding network. And forgive me if this has been spoken of at a previous meeting, I totally, how would you tell it to a layman? No.
So at this point in time, the Transportation Commission's non-motorized prioritization policy recognizes basically the priority funding network, and there's one. That's it. So it's like similar to the Blue Network. In this plan, we recognize, kind of working with the MPOBAC, that there really was a need for, in some parts of town, to get some more density in network, to kind of complete more of a grid pattern. And so they decided not that they wanted to add those streets to the priority network, but that they wanted a second tier of funding support. So I think part of it, describing it, depends on what happens in the policy decision, which is the conversation the next conversation we have in the next month's study session, which is about the non-motorized prioritization policy and what happens with that. And is the decision, do you want to prioritize them both for funding? Do you want to say, no, we're not even going to get the blue, so we just want to do the blue and leave the yellow is hanging out there? I mean, I think that has to be an evolving conversation, but their feeling was that there needed to be a second level of priority to look at what we need to set to achieve to build out, but they didn't necessarily want to add it to the mileage of the priority network.
Any other questions? No, maybe wanted to get public comment real quick. If anyone wants to speak from the public on this item, got a couple minutes. If none, we can move on to our next study session topic.
I won't be shy. Have I ever been known to be? Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Allman, speaking for the members of the Sustainability Action Network. I think this plan is a good improvement from the most recent previous Bikeway Plan, which was the multimodal study series. First of all, I really like the fact that Ms. Mortinger and the committee have emphasized comfort level. Trying to get more ridership for bicyclists basically means making it more comfortable for more people. I think that's very true, and I'm glad it's in there, and I think it's a good yardstick. But how do we calibrate that yardstick, I think is the question. Ms. Mortinger mentioned there are lots of comfort models out there. I don't know what those different models are, but if we're going to be increasing, let's say 3% or whatever number per year, which I don't have a problem with that number because it's a exponential curve, keeps getting bigger and bigger. It's going to have the bikeway system is going to have to appeal to a wider range of cyclists, not just the performance cyclists who already get out there in the streets anyway, or the fitness cyclists who get out on the trails anyway, whatever, but the commuter cyclists, like Jennifer mentioned. That's the target, and that's the key to getting more ridership. I don't think we can, if we're going to measure that level of comfort, it seems to me that there's, we're talking in this plan about 5 E's or 6 E's, however many, of education and enforcement and engineering and encouragement and all those E's. As far as creating a level of comfort, there is no substitute for engineering. Education, enforcement, there's 100,000 people in this community. And like you all said, it's slow getting that education curve up. And the enforcement curve, they're not out there 24/7 on every street. But a protected bicycle lane is there 24/7, and it is an educational tool by virtue of being there. Everybody can see it, they know what it is, including the bicyclists and the motorists. So there's no substitute for creating comfort than engineering. And I hope that, I would like you to direct staff to make a statement in the plan that engineering is the most important E. I'd just request that. As far as the most important E goes, engineering, every study, and there's been lots of them, and every poll and every research paper always comes back to the best way to create safety and the perception of safety and comfort is the protected bicycle lane. This plan needs to unequivocally emphasize that that is the preference, that is the default unless there's reasons not to build it protected. And that could be physically separated with lane delineators and a buffer, or separated off to the side of the street, or a bicycle track, whatever design, it should be protected. So I'd like you to request staff to also emphasize that aspect of this as what's the first priority for that priority funding. It's protected bicycle lanes. Other than that, just one particular issue. The multimodal studies had 23rd Street from Iowa to Haskell designated as a shared use path. It's not in this plan, and I think it should be returned. We just talked about all kinds of conflicts, motorist, pedestrian, bicycle on the sidewalks of 23rd Street, and it's every day. Somebody going to, not Jiffy Lube on your bicycle, but going to, some restaurant or a grocery store. They can't take 21st Street if they're going to Dillon's. They have to get to 23rd and drive and cycle somewhere. So that should be returned to the plan, the 23rd Street shared use path. I know that there are driveway conflicts, but the access management hopefully can take care of that. So please add that back. Thank you.
Well, given this is a study session, we're not taking action or requesting anything from staff, but we can file that away.
And we'll be collecting all the public comment from our process, whether that's submitted to us in email or in writing or through our online survey, and be responding, working with the MPOBAC to respond to that and make final revisions to the plan before you see it next. So
And the public comment goes through June.
I don't know, it's 13th or 14th.
Okay. So it's still out there
Yes.
if anyone wants to review it and make comments.
Any more questions?
Go ahead, John.
Just kind of curious where bike boulevards fit into the plan.
So bike boulevards are an appropriate design criteria that are featured. We call them shared streets. And bike boulevards are in that criteria, so they get a rating for level of comfort just like that, and they're in the design guide. So as you're looking at some of these street types, very similarly, they'll probably get narrowed out for that facility type because they'll either exceed the speed or volume. But there's possibilities as we continue to build the level of comfort model to assess additional future bikeways for appropriate bike boulevards. And I do believe there are some additional recommended facilities that are in that priority funding network, particularly 5th Street, that have already been identified as a candidate for a future bicycle boulevard. So I think the current projects will kind of guide some of the context around prioritizing those for your future discussions.
I think we'll move on to the next item. Safe routes to school update.
Yeah, so I don't have slides for this, but the Metropolitan Planning Organization has identified and begun the work of doing an updated Safe Routes to School citywide planning process as part of our work program this year. And we've partnered with our sustainability staff, City of Lawrence staff at a variety of departments, USD 497 and Ron, we've worked with him and some of his staff, and the health department to continue to evolve and work on safe routes to school planning in our communities. So we envision this process over the next year, kind of starting this fall, although we've already been out doing some school traffic crossing guard counts and continued travel tallies. To work on writing a citywide safe routes to school plan that's separate kind of from the pedestrian plan, and looking at reevaluating the routes in the school area boundaries, within the school area boundaries as part of that process. So there will be a public process where we engage the school parents and the schools to do that, and we plan to kick that off, working on some survey information from parents, known as the parent survey for Safe Routes to Schools. We've in part of some of the survey work that's happening and some of the process with enrollment and stuff. So we're working through with the school district some of that, but you'll hear more about that process in the future as we work on updating that Safe Routes to School plan.
Are we still relying on volunteers in the school, or has it risen to another level for safe routes?
For what role in Safe Routes?
I don't know, we didn't have safe routes a couple of years ago, and there were volunteers in different schools who were organizing. There was a PE teacher at South and.
Well, the only volunteers involved were the people that worked on the specific plans to the building, the advisory committee. The PE teachers and the people that are doing that are getting compensated for whatever, if we've given them extra duties that they have to do.
So, I know that we have done some work in identifying needs for sidewalks and whatnot around schools. Have we defined an area around the school for special attention because it's closer, like a defined school zone? What do we call as a school zone? Do we have a school zone?
So we can talk in a minute about the school area traffic control policy, but as far as routes for sidewalk improvements, that's the Safe Routes to Routes. That we're talking about is developing what that higher network of routes are. It's not necessarily just proximity to a school. It's about funneling kids in and identifying routes that kids can use to get to school kind of throughout that attendance boundary area. And that's what we have established, and that the Transportation Commission has made funding decisions about which of those gaps and projects they've chosen to do with the standalone and the CDBG funding that they've used, and even the state transportation alternative grant funding to fund some of those projects. Do you want to talk a little bit about traffic control policy? Because I think that answers some of Carol's.
So we can just tie that into the school area traffic control policy. You can have a mouse. I think the mouse will be fine. So I attached our current school area traffic control policy to the agenda. I believe our first policy started back in the mid-90s. Generally, this is a guide for how we process traffic control requests adjacent to schools or nearby schools. We follow, as far as signage goes and guidelines go, we follow the MUTCD. There's a chapter on school area traffic control in the MUTCD. That defines what a school zone is, and in our policy we've provided that definition of a school, that it's a designated roadway segment approaching or adjacent to a school building or grounds. And so if you see this sign here, that's a school zone sign, so you will see those in advance of our area schools on adjacent streets. That should not be confused with a school speed zone. A school speed zone is an area that is a portion of street that's in a school zone that's subject to a reduced speed limit of 20 miles per hour. Those school speed zones we've defined in our policy are marked crosswalks that are not controlled by stop signs or traffic signals. Example of the signage you would see in a reduced speed zone for a school. In addition, the policy defines school crossings, and it also gives some criteria on when we use beacons or adult crossing guards. And as Jessica mentioned, with the Safe Routes to School plan, we've started this spring to go out and recount some of the or all of the locations where we have adult crossing guards. I believe there's 34 some areas where we have adult crossing guards. A number of them have been around probably since we began the school area traffic control policy 20 years ago. It's probably a good idea to start looking at the use of those to see if they still meet our existing criteria, if there are other priorities, so that will tie into this policy. But this policy does, down here, I think in section 4, gives some guidelines on adult crossing guards and the criteria for the number of students crossing, whether it's an uncontrolled crosswalk or at a controlled crossing with a stop sign or a traffic signal, the number of students that would warrant an adult crossing guard. And so as we complete the data with the Safe Routes to School update, we may take another look at the priorities for how we use our crossing guards. The other thing I would say about the process of this policy, when a couple years ago we did add some language in here in this here under 6 and 7 under request and notification on how we're going to process changes to make sure there's good communication with all stakeholders, not just the city, but the individual schools and the school district, that if we receive a request from a citizen, that we start by taking that through the school. Generally, we try to work through the school site council to determine if that is something that others feel that needs to be reviewed, whether it's no parking or the location of a crosswalk or any number of things adjacent to a school, that the school itself would review the need for any changes before the city staff would go through any procedure with doing an engineer study or any other process to remove any traffic control devices or marked crosswalks. That policy, this revised policy also, as far as the process goes, if the school district would approve any changes that before the city would make the changes, they would approve those changes. It does, you do notice that it does say draft policy. We've gone back and forth with the school and the city to discuss the wording of the policy and probably some of the legalese I think that goes into implementing this. And so it is still in draft form, but we've been practicing and following this policy. The major changes is the process from the original policy that was adopted a number of years ago. So those are the few things that we did recognize a couple of years ago. There was some, I would say, miscommunication on some projects and coordination. We just wanted to help strengthen that policy in practice before we made any changes. So as we do go through the Safe Routes to School plan update, we would anticipate there could be some routes that change adjacent to these schools. So this policy, we would also, any route changes, we would want to route those through the school as well before we made any changes. So that's a summary of it, and if you have any questions, I've got a couple of minutes.
So in this draft, there's no mention of rectangular rapid flashing beacons. And in the, some time ago, that was still kind of unclear whether that was sanctioned or not.
Mm-hmm.
And where it is now, is that something that should be reinserted into this?
I think it's something that we can consider. It's still not, it's still an interim approved device. So we have received approval from FHWA on our last Safe Routes to School project to install them. But it would be something that could fit into here. Those are not traffic signals, so they are a little different than the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, than the pedestrian hybrid beacons. Absolutely, because on our last Safe Routes to School project, I think we had 7 that we installed at marked crosswalks, uncontrolled marked crosswalks, and so.
Yeah, I think as they're, in the concept plan for the bike boulevard, we're seeing them. So I don't know if they need to be in this policy, but it feels like as they become more noticeable to the public, we got to have clear guidelines on what is the justification for them and when are they not appropriate. So.
Yeah, and they're still being studied, and there's not any clear guidance on thresholds, when and where to use them. I think we've generally felt that they're appropriate on lower volume streets, residential streets that are 2 lanes of traffic. If you have more lanes of traffic, the signals are a better option, but they are a lot more economical, and we have seen they have seen through some studies that the compliance rate for those are higher than traditional beacons that slow flash or other devices. So, but yeah, since we've had this last draft in end of 2017, we have put those in, so that could be something that we think about in the future. We got about one or 2 minutes. Any other questions?
What's been our record in terms of injuries, accidents related to kids going to school anywhere in town? Have we had any?
I don't keep necessarily.
It's not a data point we keep in relation to schools, like
What?
pedestrian or bicycle injury or fatalities aren't necessarily kept in relation to like someone's destination or age. We could sort all of the crash data that we receive from the Kansas Department of Transportation in relation to age of party, but you don't necessarily know, were they public school children or were they with a parent or by themselves. I mean, it's not reported in that way.
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up the study session and then maybe take a 5-minute break. We'll get reorganized and start at 6:05.
You want us, we could wait just a second, see if Carol gets back in.
She has a lot to.
Okay, I think we'll get started. Welcome, everybody, to the June 3rd, 2019 Transportation Commission. First item on the agenda is to approve the regular meeting minutes for May 6, 2019.
I move to approve.
I think I did see one typo. I think Carol's last name was misspelled. So.
Oh.
You didn't catch that?
I did not either.
Got used to it.
We have a motion by Donna. Any seconds? Second. Second by John. Those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved. General public comment. I get to read this every month. The public is allowed to speak to any items or issues that are not scheduled on the regular agenda. Public comment will not be received for staff items, commission items, or calendar. Each person or organization will be limited to 3 minutes. As a general practice, the commission will not discuss, debate these items, nor will the commission make decisions on items presented at this time. Individuals are asked to come to the microphone, sign in, and state their name and address. Speakers should address all comments to the commission. Do we have any public comments this evening? Having none, we can move on to item number 3. Bicycle Boulevards, 13th Street and 21st. Our action, keep in mind, is to provide input on the concept plans for 13th and 21st Street Bicycle Boulevards. Hi, Amanda.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, Commissioners. My name is Amanda Saheen, Engineering Program Manager with MSO. I'm going to go into a little bit of background and some of the kind of preliminary things that we've done with this project, and then I'm going to hand it over to Paul with Alta to go through a little more detail on some of the design elements of the project. Kind of just take you back a little bit on these projects and the history. The pedestrian, it's kind of in the way. The Pedestrian Bicycle Issues Task Force report identified these 2 corridors as future bicycle boulevards, and that was in May of 2016. Also, the 13th Street had been on the traffic calming list since 2006. So there's a lot of history of these projects. There were also bike routes prior to that. That's where the idea of these projects came from, and that's when we moved forward with the planning of the bike ped funding, when these were ranked with the non-motorized policy, how they were selected. In spring of 2018, this body recommended the projects with the ped bike funding and the traffic calming funding, and then also City Commission last summer approved that. And in October 18, we approved the contract with Alta and been working on design since then. It's been a long few months with a lot of public engagement and thought that's went into these, and I hope you can see that tonight based on the design and all of the background information we give you. So kind of the first things we started with before we even looked at any design was a survey. We put a survey out kind of asking people what they thought were the problem areas, areas of concern, safety issues. Also discussed bicycle boulevards and the different features that it could involve, and asked for feedback on what people liked. So we wanted to do that before any design was done, so we kind of knew what everybody wanted in this project. We also had two open house style public meetings and kind of went over those same things, asked people to vote on different ideas they liked. We also had internal and external stakeholder meetings with school district, transit, fire med, the funeral homes, and we reviewed speed and volume data for these streets that we had collected. And obviously, I think we all know that the speed on both of these streets was a concern and something we knew we had to address with the project. Volume was less of a concern on 13th Street. It was really okay within the range of where it should be. Volumes are a little higher than we'd like on 21st Street, so we did know going into it there was likely going to need to be something that we addressed with that. Based on those concerns identified and everything, the team came up with 2 demo projects that we rolled out, and that was a chicane over on 21st Street in the 13th and Connecticut intersection. That was one intersection that was noted to be area of concern for people crossing it. Through that demo project, we collected feedback through a survey. We also had another open house where we collected some feedback. At that open house, we also rolled out kind of the first concept design and got some feedback on that. Then we took that first concept design to internal stakeholders, all of our field group that does the snow plowing, transit, all of that, and made sure that we had all their concerns addressed. We analyzed all the surveys, the feedback, the data from the demo projects we had gotten. We adjusted the concept and prepared the final concept plans. That's what was at this last public meeting. We posted those online. We got survey data, some responses on what people thought of those designs. Also held those 2 additional open houses and got some really good feedback this last time around. We went ahead and with the agenda packet included all the feedback we've received since that last concept design was released. So hopefully you guys were able to take a look at that. We also tested the 19th and Louisiana intersection with transit. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight. And then basically from here, we look at taking this plan forward to City Commission. If City Commission agrees with the plan, or we'll take whatever feedback and we'll make adjustments if necessary, move forward into a final design and bid the project for construction. So a little bit into, oh, that's really big. Kind of some overall considerations. This may look familiar from the public meeting, but for those of you that weren't there, we talked about current speeds on both of these streets are higher than desired. Also, we had some concerns about volume on 21st Street. We wanted to try to maintain parking throughout the corridors wherever possible, and we know it's important to the residents. It's also good for traffic calming to have some of those cars there on these wider streets. The chicane design had evolved. When we did the original demo project, it only had 2 bump outs. We didn't get the speed reduction we were hoping for, only a couple miles per hour. So we've added in the final design kind of a 3rd bump out to those. You'll see throughout the design, we've got speed limit signs and markings. We're recommending reducing the speed limit on these streets to 20 miles per hour. Also trying to reinforce that with pavement markings. So you'll see 20 mile per hour pavement markings throughout the plans. The bike boulevard pavement markings, which really help communicate to motorists that it's intended as a shared space. It also helps bicycles position appropriately so you don't have the dooring issue and as you approach intersections. There's wayfinding that we're going to do as part of the project along the corridors and also kind of at key points where there's connections to other facilities or destinations. The spacing of the elements meets the desired 650 feet between traffic calming elements, which is a best management practice. And just a couple things on some of the initial feedback we got on the surveys was major street crossing improvements and speed management were the top features that survey respondents said they would like to see. And median islands and traffic circles were the things that nobody liked. So you will not see median islands other than Louisiana, where it's a diverter type situation, and traffic circles throughout these, because we listened to the feedback and it wasn't something that people wanted to see. Some of the things we had to consider are listed here. I won't go through all of these, but obviously some of these are competing priorities. We did a lot of talking with Fire Med because everything they want is wide and they want a fire truck to be able to go through it. Well, that means everybody else can go through it very fast. So trying to work with them on different ways that we could address their concerns, but also get the goals that we needed out of the project. There was also the high school there, which on 21st Street, which presents an interesting challenge of new drivers, high volumes at certain times, different traffic patterns that we had to try to address. So there was a lot of things that we looked at, crash history, concerns of residents. There was just a lot of different things that we tried to balance with this design. And I understand, like, not everybody's gonna like every piece of it. And there's good and bad to, I think, every element in it. And we've really tried to find that balance, and hopefully you can see that. Just want to, I'll probably just leave it on this one here. Just want to talk about a couple of the big things you'll see as before Paul goes into more detail. 21st Street, it was originally planned to go from Iowa to Mass. We all know Iowa and 21st Street's not a comfortable intersection to cross at. There's no signal there. Signal's pretty expensive to put in there. I think potentially with future development on that corner that could be added, and this bike boulevard could be extended down all the way to Iowa. However, given the current situation, really felt like the safest route was to get people to 19th Street. There's a shared use path and a bike lane going in there, and there's the tunnel that then goes across Iowa. So we made the decision to make the recommendation that the bike boulevard basically turns up Osdale and goes to Osdale 19th Street to tie into the bike to the shared use path and bike lanes on 19th. We had a conversation with our multimodal team about that, whether it should be Stewart or Osdale, and based on the transit that's on Stewart, also there's more grade on Stewart, seemed that Osdale was the better connection point for that. I've talked about the volumes on 21st Street being a bit of a concern. We knew we had to deal with that, and a lot of that is people driving all the way from Iowa to the high school or Iowa to Louisiana. So we figured somewhere in there probably needed to be some type of diversion. Osdale seemed to be the most appropriate place for that. We looked at doing it at Stewart, but with the concerns of transit routes and everything, it just was not possible at this point in time. So you'll see that as part of the design. Naismith was another one where there's a really high crash frequency, vehicle crashes there. We didn't want to put a lot of funds of the project into that, knowing that there's a future CIP project to do work along Naismith. However, we did try to address some of the concerns, and you'll see some bike lanes through that section and some additional elements that Paul will highlight. Another thing is a diverter at Alabama. There's a diverter that doesn't allow northbound traffic, basically, actually any traffic from 21st Street to turn northbound onto Alabama. And that was really because we've had several years ago, probably 5 years ago, a request on that street for traffic calming, lower speed limits. There's been a concern of the traffic volumes on that street. It was denied at the time. It didn't meet the warrants. But there has been concerns for several years on that street. We've heard them throughout the design process about the cut-through traffic on that street. With the recommendations we're recommending at Louisiana, we were worried that there would be even more cut-through traffic on that street because people now can't go left at Louisiana to go north, so that they would go to Alabama and go north. Wanting to address that concern, we recommended a diverter at Alabama. I understand some of the neighbors, some like it, some don't. And it really, I'll be honest, it doesn't benefit the bike boulevard. We don't have to do it. It's something that we're trying to do in response to the neighbors. And we recommend that it is in because we think we will have more complaints on that street if we don't do something to address that. 21st and Louisiana is another intersection where there's high vehicle crash frequency high volumes. There's lots of pedestrians and bikes. I don't know if you've been out there when school lets out, but it's pretty crazy. So we knew we needed to really do something at that intersection. So you'll see that design's pretty extensive. It's an expensive design at that intersection. Feel it's necessary for everyone's safety. It's going to widen it to make sure we have a left turn lane, eliminate most turning movements. It has a rectangular rapid flashing beacon. Paul will go through that in more detail. Talked a little bit about 19th and Louisiana. Transit currently can't make that turn going northbound on 19th to turn right onto, northbound on Louisiana to turn right onto 19th Street. So they currently have to turn down 21st Street. And the only reason they're doing that is because they can't make the turn up at the intersection. Fire also has issues there. They have to use the through lane. So we ran some tests. We went out and took a bus out there and tried different arrangements. And really the only thing we could come up with was eliminating the right turn lane to make that turning radius bigger. So you'll see that as a recommendation. We think that benefits the bicycle boulevard because it gets those transit vehicles off of that really narrow section of 21st Street. You'll also see some future improvements recommended at 19th and Osdale and 21st and Mass as part of the 21st Street project. 13th Street, the intersection of 13th and Connecticut is design evolved based on feedback that we got. Also budget, but we tried to keep the most important features, which we felt were the narrowing of Connecticut to try to slow down traffic and to narrow that crossing. Oregon and 13th was another area that's evolved over some concerns by some of the businesses in the area about delivery trucks and those type of issues. And you'll see some future improvements for Mass and 13th Street recommended. Kind of getting to the budget here, which is the last item I'll discuss. When we originally budgeted these projects, obviously we did research and looked at what other communities are spending. It's very wide ranging. Bike boulevards can be very minimal if you don't have a lot of speed and volume issues to pretty extensive. This is probably in the middle ground, and so when we were budgeting, we were making a lot of assumptions. So we had originally set aside $350,000 of the bike ped funding, another $100,000 from traffic calming. When traffic calming got done, there ended up being $17,000 left from the other projects, so that's why it goes up to the $467,000. You can see what we have currently kind of committed at this point, and it leaves $330,000 approximately for construction. Our current estimate, when you take out those 3 intersections I mentioned, which are bigger intersections at each end that are higher cost, when you take those out, our current estimate's $581,000, so that leaves about $250,000 unfunded for the base project that we're recommending we proceed with. There's also these future phases of the project, which we would like to add as potential future projects to compete for funding with other projects. And you see those on the screen here. Those are some cost estimates based on the design that's recommended tonight that includes the design fee for those intersections. So those are not included in that $581,000. The $581,000, why it's really a big piece of why it's a lot higher than what we'd assumed is the Louisiana intersection is a lot more extensive than we had assumed. And also we had a really extensive public engagement phase on this project, which I think was really good and just wasn't something we accounted for. And those 2 things alone make up about 70% of the overages on the project. So I will let Paul go into some of the more specifics on the design. Try to get it to the right size here.
Hey, good evening. She would have done a pretty good job in moving through the corridors, but I'll go into a lot more detail. But like Amanda mentioned, a bike boulevard, it's a wide spectrum, and I'm under the philosophy you do what you need to do to accomplish the vision for the bike boulevard. So in some cases, you can put up wayfinding signs, some pavement markings. That's pretty much all you need. Other corridors need a little more intensity. If there's speeding issues or volume issues, you do what it takes to get those speeds down to where it needs to be, which is around 20 miles an hour, or you get the traffic volumes down to around 2,000, less than 2,000, perfect. So in the case of 13th Street, the traffic volumes were well under 2,000 cars a day, but the speeds were high. So that's why you really don't see any diversion tactics on 13th Street. You see a lot more traffic calming elements. On 21st Street, there are speeding concerns, but there's also some volume. Nothing extensive, but there is some cut-through traffic. So we did institute some diversion elements to that. Another reason for doing intersection improvements, like at Louisiana, is going to be for safety of bicyclists crossing streets. So in our initial open house, 2 open houses, we pretty much introduced the idea of the bike boulevards and elements of bike boulevards, and we let people comment on what they liked, what they didn't like. It wasn't a statistical exercise at all. I just wanted to get a feel as a designer what people wanted to see and what they didn't. One big thing that you'll notice is you don't see any mini circles. They told me flat out they didn't like the mini circles, so there's no mini circles here. The rest of it has been an evolution, and on every intersection here, there's usually multiple ways that you can do solve a problem or deal with an intersection. So in most of these cases, there's about 3 ideas that came up in my head, and then when we took it out to the public, we talked extensively to the people that attended. We looked at the surveys from people online, and the design evolved from there. And what you see today is what we came to. And hopefully, anybody that's seen the first iteration back in the April open houses to now, you should be able to see comments being addressed as we move through this. One notable element is at Connecticut and 13th. That's evolved quite a bit. And that was one of the designs that I had in my mind as we moved through this. So I'm gonna just go through, at 19th and Isledale, this is the end of the Bike Boulevard, and I'm not gonna go into, Amanda said, turned up Isledale to really connect with that shared use path to get to the grade separated crossing of Iowa. So that was my target. So this intersection has already been improved quite a bit. So my challenge was to get bikes across northbound and southbound to that shared use path on the north side of 19th Street. So Osdall is a shared street for the most part, the Bike Boulevard Street, but then to get across the intersection, we channelize them into a bike slot that gets them across the street. And there'll be an actuation for the bikes to get across the street. Also coming southbound, they're gonna be on the shared use path. They'll get to that center island, and then they come southbound. They actuate the signal and go southbound. And then it's a shared street. So what you see there, you see a bike lane coming northbound, and you see it shared southbound. Normally when you put a bike lane on an intersection, you have to have a receiving area for that bike lane. So that's kind of my rule of design. You have to, and you'll see that at Naismith too. You'll see a bike lane pick up and get across that intersection. The key is a safe and comfortable intersection for a wide range of users. So in general, you won't see many bike lanes on this, only to get across intersections safely and make it more comfortable, because the challenge of a bike boulevard is that low speed, low volume street that's comfortable for a variety of users. The intersections are the critical part to that. So, like a chain, the weakest link, you have to deal with that weak link, and usually it's the intersections. That's where people get both motor vehicle users and bicycles and pedestrians. That's where it gets challenging, and it's at the intersections. And this design kind of incorporates people walking as well as people biking. So that is in my mind at the forefront, to make it good for both, as well as good for motor vehicle users. Get them slowing down so they can react to other users, non-motorized users on the roadway. You can see that is small. My eyes are getting kind of bad, but it's 6:30, so my eyes
You can
kind of go.
expand it.
We can zoom in and down. Oops. Because we have one document, it kind of throws everything off.
There we go. So you'll see the wayfinding signs, and we kept this to the minimum, kind of show people where their destinations are. So that's what these are. We have the 20-mile speed limits. We also have it on the pavement, so if you miss the sign, you're gonna see it on the pavement. We have the Bike Boulevard markings. We decided to use Bike Boulevard marking, not monster-sized ones, or shared lane markings, because people see shared lane markings all over the city as it is. We wanted things to look different, to identify this Bike Boulevard, so it's a special kind of street. So that's why we use this type, that boulevard, and then a bike, and then the arrow marking. And it's not as big as some cities use. If you've been to Minneapolis, you may see these big monster Bike Boulevard markings. It was out of context with these streets, so we found a size that worked for these streets. The next intersection is, so between 19th and 21st, really didn't do much there. We have a speed hump on the south end. But on this slide, there's really nothing on this one. I don't want to intrude into the neighborhood too much or intrude it with signing or markings. It's already a pretty low-speed street. The next, just north of 21st, we do have a speed hump. And you may say, well, Paul, why are you got speed humps somewhere, you got some speed dips, you got some chicanes here. Well, that's my strategy, is to throw a few different things at people so they don't get used to one thing anywhere. So you'll see the speed humps, definitely, and most of the people that responded on the initial open house, they like those, they're comfortable with them, they see them. We did throw the chicanes in there, and the initial comments on chicanes at the first open house, we showed a chicane that it was medians. They didn't like that. So what we ended up doing is more of a traditional chicane treatment. We showed that at the second open house, and it got a lot of yeses. So that kind of throws a wiggle into it, and you'll see 50 miles an hour on those chicanes. To just keep people slowing down, moving through those treatments. The initial treatment we had on the street had one wag to it, and that didn't really slow, as Amanda said, it didn't really slow things down very much at all. So we have to try something different. And there's no one solution anywhere. You have to work with the community and find what works best for the community. At 21st in Alsdal, we do have a diversion treatment. So if you're coming southbound on Alsdal, you can go north and south. You can make a right, can't make a left. If you're coming eastbound on 21st, you can make a left or right. If you're coming northbound on Alsdal, you can make a right, through, or left. Pretty much do anything you want to do there. And coming westbound on 21st, you can make a right only. So that's to really divert traffic, and lessen that amount to that below 2,000 that we want to get on 21st Street. And the only way you can do diversions like this is when you have a gridded street network. So there's other choices. So you have 19th to the north, you have 23rd from the south. Those are bigger streets. So people that live in the neighborhood, we don't want to really, you have to keep the cut-through traffic out. That's what the diversion's for. So for the neighborhood, yeah, it's okay to be there, but if you're trying to cut through, it's going to be a little more difficult. So the 21st and Hillview is where we actually start doing some deflection treatments. This isn't a full chicane, but, well, it is a full chicane at an intersection. So you'll see some of those at intersections, and you'll see some mid-block. One thing in working with the fire department, they told us to look for trees and look for utility poles to locate the bump outs on, because they can't get their outriggers. They can't put them out there by poles or trees. So those are my targets. So in addition to the traffic calming, working with the fire department, we tried to place these bump outs in places that were acceptable to them in working with them. And they've seen it in all these iterations of the project. So we've shown the fire department at every step of the way to make sure they were on board and it was going to work with their operations. One thing I didn't mention at 21st Street and Ausdal is all these bumps or medians we have, they're rolled curbs and they're mountable. So the fire trucks, if they had to get through, they can get through and it's not going to damage a fire truck. So if you see a flex post somewhere, I didn't bring one with me. I need to bring one time. But you see some at 21st Street and Iowa now. What those do, they screw in and a truck can go over them. You don't want to run over them, but if they have to run over them, they can come back and the thing pops up again. So we did work with the fire department to make sure that all these bump outs that you see, they can still get through those if they need to get through those. And the same thing with the police department. We had a long discussion with the police department about access through all this also. So 21st and Naismith, this is one of the only places you'll see some bike lanes, and that's really to deal with that big intersection that we have, that split intersection. So coming into the intersection, we have a shared lane marking, shared street, but then this wide separation here between northbound and southbound Naismith, we wanted to use up that space and mark that space and narrow it all down so you don't want to try to drive through there fast. So that's where you see a bike lane coming across there. We add stop signs and stop bars there, and cross traffic does not stop. We're going to add these signs over here on these stop signs also. That's one thing that's not at the intersection now. That's going to be a benefit for all users, including motor vehicles, that cross traffic doesn't stop. So when you come out of this eastbound, we have the green markings, and those green markings really kind of raise the awareness that something different at this intersection. Kind of highlights the bike crossing there, and then we drop them into a bike lane over here, and then that bike lane goes away after about 25 to 30 feet. And then you mix in the traffic again. It gives people a chance, the bikes, a chance to mix in with traffic coming out of that intersection. Over here at Mitchell Street, this is the approximate location that we had the pop-up project. Initially, we just had these two bumps. In this version, we weave people over, and this is to get that speed reduction. So that double weave is going to allow the cars to, it's going to slow people up a lot more. And these are 20-foot wide, so between the white lines are 20-foot wide. Per the fire department, they wanted to see that 20-foot. And bikes and cars are supposed to share that space. So theoretically on each of these bike boulevards, a bicycle should be able to ride straight down that lane, and the vehicle speed should be low enough that it's comfortable for all the users. And that's why we do these chicanes and try to do all this calming to keep that speeds similar between bikes and bicycles and the motor vehicle users. It also allows people to cross the street safely. Anything below 20 miles an hour, an interaction between a car and a person walking, your chances are going to be pretty good to come out of that okay. Whereas anything over 20 miles an hour, and it gets a little shakier as far as if you're a pedestrian. So that's another rule that we go by. At Alabama, Amanda mentioned this is where we have we allow the bikes to go north on Alabama, but we close this off to northbound traffic, so cars can come south on Alabama, and they can make a left or a right. But we don't allow a right turn or a left turn onto Alabama. At our open houses, the residents over here, this one here and this one here, they were ecstatic about it. There's others that weren't so crazy about it. So that's almost every transportation project has that. You've got people that love something, you've got people that hate something, so this is no different. But in addition, we do that weave through this intersection too. This is one of those intersection weaves to slow people down coming through the intersection. We want to make sure people slow down along the street. So about every 650 feet or so is where we see these calming treatments. And I did measure it at one time, and we're about 650 to 700, and that's best practice. But you know, if you don't need it, I don't do it. But we got the spacing just worked out that way. So it wasn't something I planned. It just, where were the appropriate places for the calming? It just turned out to be that way. Between Carolina and Louisiana, we have another chicane treatment. Hopefully, again, and these are mountable, and they got flex posts on it, and they're not big, tall flex posts, they're shorter ones, so they don't damage the fire truck in case they run over them. As we get towards the school, and this is on the, right in front of the high school, we had some bumps right at the intersection of Virginia. I took those out, and I just did narrowing by striping. And we end up striping a middle. So see, I'm throwing a few things in here. So one way is to narrow it from the outsides, and then you can also stripe a median. So approaching Louisiana, it was more appropriate in the design to develop that median there, because the bikes have to go through and go straight across Louisiana, as I'll show you in a minute here. We do throw a speed cushion here. So either way you come out of that school driveway, you're gonna get a chicane going west, you're gonna get a speed hump going east. So you're not gonna miss something either way you go. At Louisiana, if you take away turning movements, you reduce conflicts, and that's the thought behind this intersection, is reducing conflicts. This is a challenging intersection. If you're in a car crossing, it's a challenging intersection. Not to mention if you're a pedestrian or somebody on a bike. There's a lot of things to look at and watch out for. So what we ended up doing is we eliminated some key movements. This southbound left turn, that's one movement that was eliminated. Coming east or westbound on 21st, you can only make a right turn. We moved the crosswalk from approximately up here. We moved it down closer to the intersection. And this has that rectangular rapid flashing beacon, and that serves the pedestrians or people walking as well as the people biking, so it serves two uses. Again, I'm getting the most bang for the buck out of what we're doing here to make it safer for everybody. And you'll see you see an extra couple rapid flashing beacons here. So it's not just okay to use those beacons on on Louisiana, but when you push the button that'll actuate those strobes, the beacons along 21st are going to go off too. So if you push the button across here, you're going to stop these people in Louisiana, but this right turner needs to know that there's a pedestrian crossing there too. So that's why I put those beacons there too. So they're all going to go off. So all motorists are going to be aware that there's a pedestrian making the crossing. And it could be a pedestrian crossing here. It could be these bikes crossing here. So trying to simplify and make it as aware as possible when people are crossing this intersection, whether you're a person on a bike or a person walking. we allow these left turns here, and in order to get the 33 feet here, we have to do a little widening on this east side of Louisiana here. There's only one light pole. That's right about here. And we're gonna move that up to the corner so we can light up this whole intersection with that new light pole. That was important to me to make sure the illumination in this intersection lights it up in the dark hours. If anybody has any other comments, this was an interesting intersection to get designed. Trying to think about all the movements, and we did run auto turn on all this, so a fire truck can run over these raised islands. They're mountable curbs, like I mentioned, so they can run over those if they have to. We did do turn movements for the fire trucks making this left, and we had to push this nose of this island back so they can make those turns. So we did run auto turns on all these narrowings to make sure that trucks can get through here and buses can get through here. I'm still trying to figure out how a bus made this turn, and that's what they did. They went into the neighborhood, just trying to get that turn movement up at 19th Street was an unbelievable challenge. On the rest of 21st, well, this is that intersection here before we move to the east side of 21st. We actually did a trial and error in this. So from my auto turn analysis, I knew it was going to be tough, and things were, the buses were encroaching. So we got the worst turning radius bus you could find in the fleet, and we put it out there, and it lived up to expectations. That thing had a horrible turning radius, so that yielded this design. So we narrowed these northbound lanes up to 11 feet, and it allowed us about 14 feet for this eastbound. So if you have a big lane like that, the challenge is don't make it too wide because somebody's going to want to fly through there. So that's why we added that median, and we had a reasonable size outside lanes, but the buses could use that striped yellow space there. But they still couldn't make the turn, so through trial and error, we ended up having to hatch out that whole right turn lane to be able to get the buses to make this turn without running over the curb line, which is important for pedestrians and people walking at that corner. So we just have hatching here. We made this northbound through lane a through right turn lane. We are going to have to change some of the phasing because it's had a right turn interval. When the westbound left turn was up, the northbound right turn was up. We're going to have to change that phasing a little bit to allow these to get through. But we eliminate that bus traffic through the neighborhood, which was another goal. So east of Louisiana, we have speed cushions. The stop signs, we didn't change any of those. You just put some new stop signs there. We're not messing with that. So we just added speed cushions through this section. Until we get to Massachusetts. And again, the link, this is a major intersection. So the reason we selected a hybrid beacon at this location is because it's 4 lanes wide. Anything more than 3 lanes, you really should step it up to use a hybrid beacon. And I know I mentioned to Jessica, we've got a guidance document that we will add to the bike plan that I use regularly on what type of crossing treatment to use. And that's what we used at this location on choosing the treatment for the crossing. So if you're coming here, the bike boulevard ends, we're going to allow people to come straight through here. But at some point, this may get bike lanes, so we want to be able to turn people to go north or come southbound to go east. So we have the hybrid beacons here, and we have LEDs for the right turn traffic. So when somebody activates the Hawk beacon, the LED no right turn is going to come up, and it's going to show a user, motor vehicle user, that somebody's crossing the street, and you need to not make a right turn then. Otherwise, you can make right turns. eastbound 21st Street, you can only make a right, you can't go straight across anymore. Westbound 21st, you can only make a right, so we eliminated two conflicting movements there. Anytime you eliminate conflicts, it's a good thing when you have pedestrians and bicycles mixing with traffic. Moving on to 13th in Massachusetts, these green markings are there now. We're adding these crossings with those green markings. So again, if you're on the bike lanes on Massachusetts, we allow those people on bikes to make those turns safely in a turn queue box, we call those. So these green boxes, they're kind of like a bike box, except you're more off to the side. So there's push buttons at each of those boxes. So you would come southbound, drop into that box, push the button, go across, get on the 13th Street Bike Boulevard. In this case, we only have 3 lanes here, a center turn lane and a lane north and southbound. We can use a rapid flashing beacon, and those are faster. They move a lot faster than a hybrid beacon. I know the ones you have here move pretty fast. So actuate them, you cross, they go dark, and you can't really miss these things. So we start the 13th Street Bike Boulevard, and you'll see we only have traffic calming treatments here. We don't really have any diversion treatments anymore. So we're sticking with the chicane treatments. We try it, and so since there's parking on one side of each of these streets, we are losing a little parking, but we made sure that when we got input from the public at the open houses, that if people were, a lot of these streets, there's not much parking in a lot of cases. So when there's not much parking, that parking isn't a calming effect. So when there is parking, I don't want to take their parking with one of these things. So for example, this one we shifted because of the resident that was using parking on 13th Street. So we shifted this to the east a little bit, so he retained his parking where he was parking. Same thing on the east end, where we had just the 2 bump outs. It was fine for the resident. When we added the 3rd bump out, it messed with his parking, so we just shifted that a little bit to accommodate them. So hopefully, we responded in appropriate fashion to comments that we got in these nitty-gritty design details and how people use their street. 13th in Connecticut, this is a lot different than it started out at the pop-up project. But this still achieves my goal of the intersection, which initially people said this is a tough intersection to cross. So my goal is just to narrow that intersection up. And this achieves it. It leaves full access for motor vehicles, but it does that narrowing of the intersection that I was looking for to get across here safely. We do a lot of painted, we've got painted bump outs, and this is MMA material. It's just it's not paint, it's an MMA, so it's gonna hold up pretty well. But we add the protection around the pedestrian crossings, and then we color to the rest of it. So you can run over that if you have to, or if you're in a truck that's making a turn onto the street, you can run over that, but we want to protect those pedestrians as much as possible. Another chicane treatment there. And this is an intersection. This chicane was actually over here, and this resident over here, I just shifted it to the intersection, so it provides another different treatment instead of a mid-block chicane. This is an intersection chicane. This is also going to benefit pedestrians by narrowing this crossing for people that want to cross this intersection. The speed table is here. We're not really doing anything of that, but we are narrowing the street through this intersection by striping treatments and using some flex posts. I noticed that this crossing here, you have a curb ramp here. There was no curb ramp here. I added a curb ramp there, so we have we'll have a fully standard crossing along this north side of the street that was missing before. But when I did that, one of the ladies that you'll see her comments from the last open house, she says, well, if you put the stop bar back here, I'm not gonna be able to see past this rail on this bridge here. So what I did was move the stop bar out here. Since we narrowed the street, you can get a car sitting up in here. So we have a yield marking back here by the crosswalk. You pull up, you'll look both ways. The visibility's way improved, much more improved with this design. And we get our pedestrian crossing here. We also have a bike escape here to get onto the trail easier. Instead of making a sharp right turn, we allow the bikes to come through here and get up on the shared use path. And then we're over here at 13th and Haskell, and we had a lot of discussions about trucks getting to the glass company here because we had a bump out on this side at first, and then we moved it to this side, and then we got rid of it. And we just have a hatched bump out. It still gives a visual change that you're on a different street by doing that hatching and the flex posts at that entry, but when the trucks do their deliveries, it's not going to impact. They've got the same intersection they always had. And then we have the wayfinding signage here to direct your way. And that's the end of that project. Like I mentioned, in most cases, we had a lot of choices. This is one set of choices that evolved from our comments from the public. We didn't use all the treatments, but you don't have to use them. I try to mix them up a little bit to keep people on it, off their, from getting consistent, to keep those speeds down. That's the ultimate goal. So, any questions you have?
I have a couple. So I don't want to hog everything, but as an engineer myself, this stuff's particularly interesting to me. I'm not a transportation engineer, but the whole process is pretty fascinating. I had a couple more technical questions, I guess. The first one on 21st and Louisiana, you show coming on Louisiana Street, coming from the north, but on the south side of that particular intersection. The street says it's being widened to 33 feet. What is the current width of that street?
It measures about 29.
I think it was 31, I think expanding it 2 feet.
It was between 29 and 30, and that we just needed that extra. We need 11-foot lanes because I know the transit they want 11-foot lanes.
So transit, okay. That's what I was gonna ask, because 11 feet is
that.
pretty wide for a neighborhood street. That's almost like highway width, so I was
Right.
surprised to see it quite so wide when everywhere else you're trying to slow cars. But then there's a wide lane there. What's that doing? So
Yeah.
can the buses currently go down the bike boulevards if they're configured to being, with all the bump outs and the chicanes? Or are they not gonna be able to use any bike boulevards at all?
If they need to, they could. I know a fire truck can get through there, and the fire truck and the bus are comparable wheelbases. So I know the fire trucks can get through there physically. I mean, we kind of weed them through. They may not want to drive that because you're going to have to slow down to go through
Yeah.
and stay in your lane completely. I know the fire department, I know when you were riding with them, they kind of encroached on the center line a little bit, but theoretically, they can stay between the lines. And those are 20-foot, so the chicanes are 20-foot in width from curb to curb. We gave a little bit room here just because of we've got the rapid flashing beacons on this median here, so I wanted to leave at least that 11-foot there. It's still not going to feel really wide when you got those curbs on both sides. Everybody's got a different sensitivity to width. Like I mentioned, like you mentioned, a highway width, it's okay to be 11 or 12 feet, but on lower speed, lower volume streets, you don't need 12 feet in most cases, so.
I just want to point out, I looked at all the crash data here. There was quite a few rear end crashes because there's not currently a left turn lane. There's like kind of a weird painted median that people are using as a left turn lane for the northbound movement. And so when cars are stopping there, they're not fully out of the travel lane and they're getting rear-ended quite often. So that was one of the reasons too for recommending that, was so that we could actually get the full left turn lane there and try to help with some of those crashes that we were seeing at that intersection.
So that there wasn't currently pretty much any real left turn lane. I guess my question is then, could it have been a 9-foot left turn lane? So then you wouldn't have had to widen the street and spend the extra money to relocate the light post and have more asphalt?
I think you looked at it all as far as the widths and.
Well, like you said, you could put a 9-foot left turn lane there, and.
I mean,
you
the
could-
buses
you-
aren't gonna use it, right? If it's
Fire
just,
trucks will though.
but I mean, they're not gonna be worried about fitting in particular. I mean, as long as they can get over there, right? I mean, it seems like fire trucks would go left regardless of if there's a left turn lane or not, right? Like, they'd figure out a way to do it. But for normal traffic, it would be mostly cars and passenger vehicles, right? So, I mean,
Most likely.
according to Federal Highway Administration, 9-foot to 11-foot is about appropriate for a neighborhood street. So it seems like, since that particular lane didn't have to be transit, it maybe could have been 11 feet, or, sorry,
10 feet.
9
I
feet.
think we, as a city, we've tried to always maintain 10-foot lanes as a minimum. I don't know that we have anything that's been designed to be less than that. Also, point out that there's a lot of high school students and new drivers in this area,
Mhm.
so want to be sensitive to the fact that there's a lot of inexperienced drivers. So I think we just felt most comfortable with widening this because it's really tight. There's also along that, the eastern side and western side, there's like a little wall built right back from it, like
Mhm.
on that residential property, and it just feels very narrow right now. So I think looking at it, we didn't feel comfortable leaving it the width it was. You actually went out and did survey, I believe, and confirmed.
We measured it,
Yeah.
and, you know,
Could you
I'm not gonna argue with you. Could you make it a 9-foot left turn lane? Yeah, you can, but
I think there was concerns with that, that we wanted to try to address so that we didn't make this
Mhm.
intersection worse than it was. Because clearly, even though there's not a painted left turn lane there, it's not functioning at the width it is, safely.
Okay. Okay.
that's a good
Yeah.
comment, though.
I'm just always looking for cost savings, and that kind of looked like one. But I figured there was a lot of thought that went into it, so, you know, I'm not trying to change the design, I'm just trying to get to the bottom of it, really. What else? On 13th in Massachusetts, there's parallel-ish bike crossing lanes, or bike lanes that cross. The one on the south lane seems to line a bike lane with another bike lane, where the one on the north seems to just run you right into the curb. Why is that not parallel with the one on the south side?
Well, we got them, we cut into this corner here, but then the intent is just for them to jump into that southbound lane after they get across the street. It doesn't really go west of here.
Mhm.
So my receiving lane is essentially this. That's my
Oh,
receiving
okay.
lane in that case. Whereas coming across this way, they would jump out of and sit in here, and then they're gonna drop into this bike lane, and then that bike lane goes away after about 25 or 30 feet. And
So-
you blend in with traffic.
Okay. So there's not really any bike lane on the west side of that then?
No,
Okay.
no, the network doesn't go that way.
So to
You
hit-
can go that way, but the network
Okay.
doesn't go that way.
So then to hit the requirement for having a receiving thing, basically that little space in between the green and the crosswalk pretty much does it, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
that makes sense.
what it could, because if you push this button and you're coming across here, most likely you're gonna do a radius,
Mhm.
and that's the way you're gonna operate. So all my design, I'm trying to coach good, effective cycling too. I'm
Yeah.
a cycling instructor, so
Mhm.
I try to kind of coach people in the right direction anyway. So that's another one of my goals.
Okay.
That's not bad for a highway guy, an ex-highway guy, so.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll try to be done soon. And another one was, so I was just curious, when I was reading through all the comments, a lot of people were really not for chicanes. And I don't know if this was before you switched them to I forget what style you said, but you kind of switched up the design that you were showing. They were either a median version or on the side of the street. Were the comments just all over the place for chicanes, that they didn't like them? Many people like speed bumps, which, as somebody who owns and rides a car, and I have shock absorbers in my car, if you want it to last longer, you don't want to keep it going over speed bumps. Chicanes are much better in the long run for your car's durability, so I'm surprised that people went for that. Any history?
I think that people are used to seeing them.
So just like fear of change, basically?
Yeah, and the initial chicanes, the pictures that we have, they had a median, so they took the traffic around it.
Mhm.
And when I noticed, and there was a lot of people not liking those things. So
Weird.
for the next open house that we had 2 days later,
Mhm.
I was able to update that examples that we showed, and it was a total difference, and it was true chicanes in the second version we provided, and that made a big difference. There was almost unanimous, well, it's not statistical, but there was a lot of people that liked that option. And actually, we showed just a single lane chicane. Of course, the fire department wouldn't like that a whole lot, so we made
Yeah.
it 2 lanes wide. So, the more you pinch things, the more you're gonna slow down, within reason, so.
Makes sense. And the final question I had, just out of curiosity, so I've been to a couple countries, and what I've seen in mixing bikes with traffic, with transit, with pedestrians, is that visual traffic slowing is much more common in places like Europe and Asia, where you have these kind of zigzags that get more ziggy and zaggy as you go towards the crosswalk to kind of, visually stop you, or lines that get smaller and smaller by the time you get there. Is that a part of your toolkit, or is there something preventing you from Federal Highway Administration laws that don't allow you to do that kind of thing?
Well, that visual narrowing, I kind of do some of that, as far as the zigzag lines and stuff. I've gotten into trouble with using colors at intersections, because, the more striking an intersection is, you're gonna slow down, you're gonna say, what the heck is this?
That's kind of the point though, right?
But I've got my hand slapped a few times from FHWA where I tried to do colors at intersections. And you can't be distracting with what you do, although I think that's good because it kind of makes you more aware of things. So the color that we're going to use over at Connecticut is more of a tan.
Yeah.
And they're okay with tan bump outs like that. If you try to do a blue one, oh my gosh, you're in trouble.
That's so weird. And
If you try to do a blue crosswalk, you're going to be in trouble.
And it's from the feds, basically, or like ADA. Like, who are the governing bodies who are against this?
That's pretty much MUTCD. And I personally, I look pushing the envelope and seeing what I can get away with.
I see that.
And that's for the benefit of the users. What's going to work best. I know if you go to Indianapolis, and if you go to Indianapolis, they got a blue pattern on the pedestrian crossings, and you got a green pattern on the bike crossings. It's fine in Indianapolis because for some reason, it's okay there, but if you try to do that anywhere else, you're in trouble. I tried it. So different FHWA offices, they react differently. In North Dakota, like I mentioned, we tried to do a blue crosswalk, and we got slapped around a little bit there. So, it depends on your regional office. And you do want to keep to some standards. So using the green, that's pretty standard. If you use green, you're way far ahead a lot of communities by just using the green. And using the right type of green, you're using a good type of MMA that's going to last a long time, because I've tried that. The last thing I want to do is put something out there that's going to cause your maintenance crews the major headaches. So we're going to pick the right treatments so that it's durable. So I have thought of all that. And I do what I can get away with.
Yeah, that's what I was
within
just
reason.
curious, like, if there was something not allowing you to do that. So.
Yeah.
Cool.
Let's try something just a little different here to try to facilitate this. Let's start with Carol, and if you don't have any questions, pass. But if you do, ask your questions and tell us when you're done, so we're not interrupting each other. And I'll go last. So, Carol.
Okay. I was wondering if there was any way to anticipate what the traffic will do on 21st Street. If there's cut-through traffic, they're going to find another route. Are we trying to move them back to 23rd Street, or are we not anticipating what will happen yet?
Well, we're not trying to do a major shift in traffic. We are trying to divert some traffic, but we're trying to get down a few hundred. I mean, number one, it's around 2,500 cars a day, 2,300 cars a day. So we're not talking about diverting 1,000 cars a day. If that was the case, it could be a problem. But I think we're trying to divert some traffic, not all the traffic. And there is a difference in that diversion of what you're trying to divert. In which case, if you had 5,000 cars a day on 21st Street, I would say you probably shouldn't do a bike boulevard on 21st Street, because you're gonna have to divert a couple thousand cars to get down to the right number. But in this case, we're not trying to divert an enormous amount. Where they're gonna go through, we've got a big street to the north, 19th, and we have a big street to the south. Usually you pick a bike boulevard for a connection through, which also makes it a cut-through connection. So what we're trying to do is we are trying to push people to those bigger streets, and a couple hundred cars a day on a bigger street isn't really gonna throw any of the intersections and the operations that signalize intersections. It's not gonna throw it into a poor level of service or operation, which I wouldn't want to do by diverting traffic. That's the last thing I would want to do. Or I don't want to divert traffic onto another residential street that would be impacted. And the grid street network kind of helps with that. You can't really divert traffic through diversion if you don't have at least some grid network for people to get through.
Schwegler School is in rather an unfortunate location. Will it be impacted by this?
We tried to allow the north-south movements and leave that as it is, so it shouldn't be impacted.
Are you planning any pre and post data?
Absolutely. We've done a lot of pre-data leading up to this. Before you hired me to do it, you had a lot of data, and that's the first thing I asked for is what data do you have? So I know if we're in the ballpark with going down the Bike Boulevard route. I think the staff is looking at, they've done one follow-up to check speeds after our pop-ups, and that's where we found out that we weren't getting the speed reductions we were expecting. So a follow-up is definitely planned for the number of the speeds of cars, the volumes of cars, as well as the volume of bicycle users that are going to use these streets. Because a good sign is going to be increased use in bicycle use on these streets if we accomplish what we want to out of this.
And the sidewalks are all passable on these streets that are involved?
Yes, and well, as we've been looking on 13th Street, a lot of the curb ramps have been improved just
Yeah.
in the few months that I've been working on the project.
As you know, we're doing a lot of other projects for sidewalk maintenance. It's a whole nother conversation. That's not what any of these funds are for. So obviously, we're not addressing any of the hazards that exist along residences. There is other city projects and initiatives to go through and improve ADA ramps, to add sidewalks where they're missing. So this project didn't, this was settled on as bike money. So we tried obviously to address the pedestrians as we could, but it also wasn't, we didn't want to take all the money and build a sidewalk where there isn't one. Those are, really, there's other programs that are working on all of those. So we did try to address it to some extent, but it's not fully addressed because there's other programs that are picking up those pieces.
Thank you, Carol. Kathryn?
I don't have any questions.
I'm tipped out.
You're done.
I've exceeded my quota, but thank you for allowing me to do so before changing the rules.
So the difference between a chicane and a speed hump, I mean, there's not really, they both do the same thing to slow traffic,
Right.
and you just plop them they're sort of random, the choice.
Right. Well, and we do, what I didn't show over here is we actually have a speed dip in here on 13th Street. That's a little new one there. Where is that? There it is right there. There's the speed dip. So somebody may argue with me, but it's opposite of the speed bump. So if you're riding a bike, you can go right down the middle of the street and you're not going to feel anything. But if you're right on either side of the center line, if you're in a car, you're going to feel it. It's
Yeah.
about 3 inches down, but it doesn't hold water and it's not going to hold grit. It's just a calming treatment to get you to slow down. If you go too fast, you're going to bump your head, and your
Yeah.
shocks aren't going to like it. So a chicane isn't going to jostle you, but you're going to have to slow
Yep.
down. Otherwise, if you hit the curb, you're going to feel it. It's going to be
So
more
there's
like
no
a speed bump.
criteria that you choose one over the other?
No.
Okay.
It's a palette of tools
Right.
that we use. And this seemed to work out with the parking on one side of the street or the other. It worked with
That
that.
slows.
So that's one reason why I ended up using a chicane in a lot of cases
Okay.
here, is because we didn't have the parking on one side of the street. And I didn't want to, I wanted to minimize parking reduction also. The speed humps, some places love them and some places don't like them. You know, we still use them as a tool, and people were used to them, that's why they didn't really flinch at those.
Right. Increased traffic that may go to 23rd or 19th. I mean, I think 23rd is lovely now. I mean, it really, the traffic is really reduced with the bypass. 19th, did 19th just get widened?
No, I don't think it's not getting widened. It's always, I don't know, it's what you've done before I started, but,
Okay, so that is
But
gonna help
it's-
move
but yeah, it's
traffic too.
not, like, its
It's not-
capacity hasn't been increased. But again, we're talking probably a couple hundred car
Yeah.
reduction between the two streets.
Right.
So we didn't really feel like that was a huge impact to either street, because I know 19th Street's already pretty busy.
Right. And then I just read in the comments, there seemed to be a lot of concern with chicanes not being safe for cyclists. And I don't know if cyclists were saying that or if just people who maybe didn't understand how the chicane worked.
Well, there was one that was saying that, but then I remember. But,
They're in
Yeah,
the
we-
middle, they take the lane, right?
you're
the
supposed to
cyclists.
take the lane through a chicane, so, you know, you should be taking a lane anyway, driving down the street. That's my intent, is where you're
The
supposed
whole
to be
thing, they're in the
riding,
lane.
the whole thing.
Okay.
So nobody's gonna try to pass you in it.
Right.
So I know one person mentioned an escape route through the chicanes. I'm like, well, it's a rolled curb, so if somebody does try to do that, you got a rolled curb that you're gonna roll over also. Theoretically, you don't need an escape route because you're taking the lane,
Right.
and you shouldn't be passing because it's a double yellow.
Yeah.
And we don't have double yellows along the whole stretches of road, just through the chicane areas. It's the only place we have that double yellow, so you shouldn't be passing anywhere. Shouldn't be passing anybody on these streets anyway.
Right.
So, that was the concern that was voiced to me at the open houses. And, I think there was, just the understanding that you're supposed to take the lane in these cases, because the speed and the volumes is low enough that it should be comfortable for any cyclist. Although these are all being designed for the 60% of cyclists that are interested but concerned. So if, somebody that rides a lot, I'm not really worried about them because they're gonna ride anyway. That's that big chunk that, you know, they're not sure about it. That's who I'm kind of designing these for.
Right. Okay, that's what I have.
Hopefully that pans out. That's my goal.
You've mentioned parking a couple times. Are there any locations where parking is affected greatly?
You know, as far as the parking, the usage along here, we didn't do a parking usage study, but I know the streets, when there's no parking on it, they're super wide. So where I try to place these bump outs, they're usually by a utility pole or a tree, and most people they're not parking there anyway. So I try to pick spots that you're not wanting to park anyway in general, or I didn't see parking when I was, you know, working on the design. And where there was, and it turned out to be a parking where I threw one, I shifted it based on the comments. And comments both to me as far as, and comments to staff, because I know 13th we ran into it a couple times. On 21st, we didn't run into any kind of challenges because we weren't really putting these in front of houses. There may be a couple in front of houses, but I tried to put them in front of a, you know, a utility pole or something.
I think the other thing is on 13th Street, you'll notice it's almost always like there's a street, a house, you know, an alley, and then there's a house and a street. So they have side streets in most cases. I think the two comments we got were in places on 13th Street that didn't happen to have a side street next to them. And those were the two places that we adjusted. So I think with the short block, especially over in East Lawrence, the short block distances there, that it worked out to where people generally have other places to park. And so we didn't really get a ton of negative responses, and we did make the adjustments, as Paul mentioned, in those couple of cases where we did, so. Trying to be responsive to that as much as we could.
In the extra bump that we put in there, I only had 2 bumps on the initial design that really restricted any kind of parking. You'd lose a couple spaces with that. You know, by adding that other bump in there, it made it a little worse for parking, but it should make it better for the speed reductions that we're after. So I did sacrifice a parking space for a speed reduction in that case.
Okay, I'm good.
Thanks, John. All right.
Well, I wanted to just ask you maybe to just make sure we kind of got clarity on the use of the green crossings. I know when we talked to the open house, you explained about the need to have a receiving lane, and I know that came up. But I just wanted, we're going to see more of those, obviously, with the bike boulevards, and we already have some in place. But could you just help us understand when you're using them, when you're not using them, how the volume of traffic might impact whether they are used at a crossing, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I use green to highlight conflict points. It's technically the technical reason you're supposed to use those green markings is, you can paint a whole bike lane green, but is the whole thing a conflict point? Not really. So I wouldn't waste your money on painting the big green bike lane, only use it in conflict points. So trying to take that approach and using those where you have highlight the conflicts and showing where bikes are supposed to be riding, and not doing solid bars, breaking the bars like a high visibility crosswalk. That's kind of, it's maximizing visibility and minimizing cost. I think if you keep that approach with all your bikeways, you're going to be in good shape with that. And
is there a volume of traffic that kind of triggers your thought that we should have a painted green, crossing here? Or, I mean, how did you decide it was on certain roads?
Well,
apart from whether there's a receiving lane or not.
Well, I know there's, you can use green markings or you can use chevrons, like the corporal stripes. There's a few choices in intersection treatments. So what we go by and what Relta was involved in is the NACTO guide, which has different treatments in it. So there's a few different treatments. You can just use skips on both sides, and that shows the bicycles where to go, but doesn't necessarily highlight that conflict area. And as far as volumes, traffic volumes, I think you got to be proactive. So even on a low volume road crossing, and actually most of the crossings that we're using the green on here, you got the higher volume crossings, even though you have a low volume, like Boulevard Street. It's more for that bigger street and that higher volumes on those streets where you're making those crossings. Naismith's another story. You've got a lot of traffic volume on Naismith, not huge, but it's higher than on 21st Street. So I highlight those crossings. Just putting a green marking along 21st or 13th isn't going to do anything unless you're at a higher volume intersection. But there are several choices. So like I mentioned, you can do just parallel white bars. You can put green between them. That gets it more visible. You can do the corporal stripes. That's another way instead of the green. All of them are fine. All of them are per national standards. The MUTCD we keep pointing to. That's just trying to keep things consistent in how you apply it. If you have a shared lane marking, so you'll notice on this street over here. Louisiana is a good example. There we go. I do use just a green approach just to make sure difference. We've got the bike shifting to the left, coming across. And I did highlight, I did use green here just for targets for the bicycles coming across there, so we know it's, bikes are supposed to be there, not a car is supposed to go through there, although you could probably run a car right through there. Not supposed to. If you see green, you probably shouldn't go there. But I don't do a green marking across here. And then we don't have, you know, this is just a shared street, so I can't really put a green, right.
I guess what I'm trying to understand is, because it's really, green markings in this town are brand new. You know, we've got one example, and it seems like they might be an inexpensive way to make improvements across our entire community, but I don't understand when they're kind of justified. Our reluctance in the past, I think, has been out of concern of maintenance. And so, if it's something that maintenance is not a tremendous concern, I'm curious how many other intersections that treatment could be a really good improvement, and how we might decide which intersections. Is it ones that have a high number of crashes that have been documented, or is it a certain volume of traffic? So it's getting a little outside of the bike boulevard piece, but just in general, when is it best to think about applying that treatment in the
It's
intersection?
kind of a matter of taste,
Okay.
and that's the easiest way to put it. When I tried to start putting green markings in St. Louis, oh man, trying to put intersection markings, so the double white lines through the intersection. Boy, I got jumped on by the streets director for trying to do that, and he says, I need a policy, a standard to use for that. And I said, well, if you can't see you can't see the bike lane on the other side, you better look like using the markings, because you got to know where you're going. And once I got through that, a few of those, it does make sense, because it guides cars too, as well as bikes. And then I introduced the green markings in between the white stripes that make it even more visible, and make that conflict point where the bike's supposed to be more visible between for a motor vehicle user. So it's really a matter of taste and a community and how you want to apply things. I like putting those intersection markings everywhere. It's just a matter of taste and
So is there evidence that they reduce crashes? Or is it just?
I know there's been
preference?
study just to get them into the MUTCD using those markings. It did significantly reduce crashes, and there's study data related to that. We can pull that out of some of the records during the tests, because they all have to do request to experiment to use all these. Even a bike box that just got approved formally, that was always an experimental treatment. So what they were trying to do is get a good consistent application. Except we are getting more choices now, thank goodness, because 10 years ago, we didn't have a whole lot of choices in bikeway design. You had to do this or that's it. You didn't have a choice. Now we got a few more choices, and it gives communities a chance to kind of do what they see fit and what their community asks for, and it does make it visually noticeable, your bikeway network, if you use green, and I personally like green. I like using the right green that's going to last at least 7 or 8 years. If it comes off in a year, it's not the right material. If you use some thermoplastic, if it's not applied right, it's going to come off in a year or less. So using the right material makes all the difference, and it's going to get you a good experience. I used some in my hometown where I was a councilman for a while. I got a free application, and that material is a piece of junk. I'd never use it again. They need to mill that stuff off. But then the other application we used was perfect, and it's still holding up fantastic. So it's really pays to do the homework about the materials you use. And then it's a positive experience.
So then, the other question I had was around the use of the rectangular rapid flashing beacons. When they're, it's the 3-lane road, I think Massachusetts and 13th that you recommended those?
Yes.
And so in that case, can you explain maybe how if the beacons are facing both directions of traffic, or if it's just one direction of traffic?
Yeah, I kinda got them, I got them, two of them facing southbound traffic and two of them facing, coming from the south. I got two of them facing them on both sides of the road. And I got them facing the side streets too, again.
Right.
So if you push a button, they're all gonna go off. It's
Okay.
gonna highlight to any motor vehicle user that's trying to use the intersection when the bicyclist or person walking is. And that's just to get the visibility. I know we had a discussion about, on a two-lane road, do you use two or do you use one? That's a policy that you can, make your own choice on that.
Well, I think what we have right now is on the two-lane road, the lane that is, that it's approaching is the one that flashes, and then there's not one on the opposite side of it. So there's two that are at that crossing rather than four. So that's what I was trying to get clear. In the case where there's three lanes of traffic.
Three-lane, I think it's a big, I would recommend both sides of the street just to make it more visible, because it's a wider street. That way it's coming at you on both sides. So that's what only the ones I've designed have been on both sides of the street. I think if you got a two-lane road, you got a choice on whether to use two or one.
I think most of ours currently too are mid-block crossings, so they're not at an intersection, so you've really only got the 2 lanes and you don't have the turn lane. I can't think of any we have where there's the third lane also. So all of these were a little bit different than the ones we've done, where the ones we've done have been on a little bit lower volume streets and have generally been at mid-block locations. So I think with adding them at intersections, that's where Paul has introduced kind of the side street ones too, that we don't have anywhere yet. But as we start adding more, I think it's good to start setting these precedents of what we're gonna do at each one. But I think they are a little different than any of the current locations that we have them.
Good question.
Thank
I mean,
you.
it's almost, it's kind of an art, it's engineering, but it's an art form too. And there's a lot of ways you can, choices, and a lot of it's engineering judgment. I know that the table that I gave to, Jessica, there's a whole engineering judgment rule there. So there's preferred, and there's don't do, and then there's use engineering judgment. And that's where I get paid the big bucks, I guess, for the engineering judgment.
Well, can I point out one more thing that I totally forgot during my part? I wanted to bring up that Paul really did try to work with us to keep this within the budget we had. And one idea he had was not doing the full depth removal to do these full mountable curbs. We looked at that. It would save a significant amount of money. However, we got a lot of pushback from our operation, like our field operations, because they're not gonna hold up like these fully, I mean, we're removing the pavement, actually installing full curb. Also, with fire trucks potentially running over them and stuff, we just thought really this was a longer term thing. It made sense as far as if we're gonna do these, let's do them right. So I do want to give credit to Paul that he did have some ideas to bring this back in budget. And it was city staff that really pushed and said, if we're gonna do it, let's do it so this is there, that's something there for a long time, and that we're not having to go out and fix 2-3 years from now. So it was something I meant to point out and just forgot to mention, so.
Just a few, Paul. I was hoping that you all would talk a lot about your process, and you did, and I really appreciate that. I think that's important for us to see the big picture of how this all happens, and we've had questions over the last couple of years about that, and this is really a good deal in terms of understanding what you all went through. And gee, 107 pages of stuff to look at was pretty impressive. A few questions I have would be the high school. And I know you all had to have a lot of meetings with the folks at the high school, and I know initially there was some pushback. I'm curious how that went, where it started, how you addressed their issues, and are they on board now?
I'll be honest, we haven't heard much from the high school since our initial meetings. There was some initial concern. I know we did try to address some of their concerns. One of them was students that are using the sports field south of Lawrence High. and making sure that that access stayed open. So that was one that we listened. Also, I know that, you know, access to the school, maintaining what they have currently is important to them. You know, we do change the access a little bit in that technically right here, that first entrance is into their parking lot's really close to the intersection and really shouldn't be used turning left out of there. So the paint should keep people are probably still gonna do it, but it's painted, you're not supposed to. So we did try to impact their access as little as possible. So we had some initial meetings with them. Since the initial meetings, we did have a request to meet with a couple of the school board members. We never could work out a time that worked for everyone, so we ended up I was constantly sending the design to leadership with the school district, who was forwarding on to the school board. And that it was mostly communication in that way, and we didn't hear any negative responses from them. And I know that I had a email specifically from one of the school board members before these last open houses saying she wasn't able to make it, and she wanted to know the link to the designs. Gave her the link to the designs and didn't hear any feedback. So I guess we've tried to communicate with them and tried to address their concerns, but I wouldn't say that we've got yes, we're good with it response, but we also haven't got any negative response since we've released the designs.
Well, and initially, my staff, my planner actually met with some of the students and some of the teachers there. So that was our initial push for engagement, to get them involved in seeing what we're doing. Because one of the comments that we had was, no, not a whole lot of kids walk or bike to school, and, you know, we see people walking and biking to school, so, you know, we want to make sure they can get there in a variety of ways, and in addition to cars.
Well, that kind of led to I don't know, maybe I should save this for a comment, but when most of us were 15, we were ditching our bikes for cars. And wouldn't you want to see that flip a little bit? And is there interest from the high school, the school district, in developing any kind of bike share program, or, you know, any kind of initiative or thoughts about doing anything to
We're trying to
move in
stir that up with
direction?
the students.
Yeah, I know, like Jimmy went and talked to a class, I don't remember which class it was. He went and talked to a class. He also tabled, he had a table at lunch where he tried to talk to the high schoolers about the project and everything. So definitely tried to create that interest. We've also talked to the school district when we started this project about potentially doing a rollout of some bicycle-friendly driver training to students. So that's something that, as we push forward on the project, we should continue to have those conversations with the school to say, hey, if you want to get a parking permit, you need to take this online class. If we can get the school district to buy into something like that, we think there'd be some benefit. So we are going to continue on the education piece and all that to try to work with them to do that. But I do think Alta did a good job with that outreach at the very beginning and trying to get that student interest. We had a lot of our meetings at Lawrence High, and we actually had the school district pushing out all of our meeting notifications to all the parents and everything too, to try to get them involved. So doing what we can for that shift. But I also hear, well, they carry too many books and all these things too. So
Just seems like a huge opportunity, you know, and sometimes we get surprised when we get pretty far down the road with some things that arrive from the school district. So just thanks for that.
But this has been a really good interaction with the staff, interaction with the public, interaction with you during some of the last open house. We've had, I mean, this has been one of the better experiences I've had. I mean, they're interested, and what I like people is I want them to see that when they make a comment, make the comment, and then if we can do something, we'll do it. And if it works, you know, we're not going to get all comments. There's no way. But if you can see a result of the comments and the interactions, I think that's a big plus. And I've seen a lot of that on this project. It's been a really evolution of you know, did this turn out exactly the way I pictured it to start off with? No, it didn't. It's been just an interactive process.
Okay, any last things? Okay.
That's fine. So I was just wondering, at intersections where there are crossing lights that the cyclists may have to activate, first of all, are those buttons easily accessible to the cyclist, so that you don't have to get off your bike and walk up a ramp and push it and then try to get back in the intersection.
Yeah, they'll be right arm's
Right
reach
there.
to where we want you to stop.
Okay, and then another one, there are some intersections in town where you push a crosswalk, whether it's for a pedestrian or a cyclist, but the people coming from the opposite side who are making a left turn also have a light, and they're not watching for the pedestrians, and I'm wondering if that's delayed in any way at these.
Yeah, most of those additional rapid flashing beacons I added in here are to kind of that opposing traffic. It's
Okay.
to get them alert that somebody's crossing the intersection. So that's why I added those. You know, and they're not cheap. Those rapid flashing beacons aren't cheap, but as a safety, you know, if you're gonna make a safe crossing, let's make a safe crossing. And I can show a picture of the example that I drive through on my way to work every day. So no, I didn't create that on my own. I took a good design and applying it here, because, you know, just doing the crossing is one thing, but if you got other turning movements that are gonna conflict with that, you have to warn them too.
Okay, thank you.
Carol?
On budget. We're taking 200, this takes 250,000 out of the PED bike budget. How much is left?
So there'll be with this, we're not asking you to approve that necessarily. We're just asking for feedback on the design. The next agenda item that Jake will present goes through the whole budget
Okay.
that's remaining for this year and what the recommendation is for that. We just wanted to give you kind of a primer for that so that you're prepared when Jake gets up to talk about that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Did a great job. Appreciate it. Public comment on this agenda item. Step to the stand and tell us who you are, where you live, and we're anxious to hear from you.
Hello, my name's Blair Sutton. I live at 401 Missouri Street, and I'm a bicyclist. And Steve, as you mentioned, understanding the timeline was great at their May open house. Seeing the timeline over here and the whole process of what they'd built up to and walked us through, I agree that was great. And I'm excited about how far we've come, and I think both these designs are very promising. So, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Matt Kirkland. I live at 19th in Alabama. So first again, I want to thank the staff and design team for all this process and all the engagement. We saw a lot of neighbors at the meetings and everything, and obviously it took like individual requests into the design plan, which is great. On a big macro level, I would support kind of any infrastructure we can put in to support bikes. But then I live in the project area, and it's going to change like everything we do about all of our driving. And I'm still really, really in support of this. So 19th in Alabama, that means we're going to have to change 50% of the way we like get to our house, because we're coming, you know, from that direction some of the time. We drive down 21st Street all the time. But I think our family would be really happy to move that traffic to 23rd Street or 19th Street also, if it makes a safer place for cyclists. And I think my family is probably in the target audience for this change. We are people that bike sometimes when it's nice, when we feel like it. My kids bike to school sometimes. I bike to work downtown. We bike to church on Sundays downtown when the weather's nice. But it always feels dicey, you know, feel like we've got to be like, you know, ducklings, you know, and try and get the kids boxed in. And but anything we can do like this to make it feel safer and help reduce that traffic, we're definitely in support of. And I think this plan is great. I ask you to approve it, build it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
My name's Ben Gulick. I live at 1505 Vermont Street. I just want to commend the team on a really good plan here. I'm super excited about it. I think Laurentians deserve the freedom to travel however they see fit, and so this is just, you know, even tips the scales just a little bit towards bicycles away from cars, which has been the emphasis for many years. So just ask you to approve the project. I'm excited about it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Hi, good evening, Michael Allman again. First of all, I want to thank Paul and Alta Planning. I think the design is everything that was to be expected. I think it's great. I have a few tweaks that I would like to suggest. But first of all, commenting on Mr. Bryan's questions about green pavement. Green pavement, I think, in Lawrence, it's a watershed moment. I think we've graduated to the big league now. It really indicates commitment to comfort and safety for bicyclists. I'm wanting to suggest, I mean, there's green pavement indicating the conflict points, like Paul pointed out, at Naismith and at Massachusetts, crossing those streets. I think for some reason they're not there, and I think they should be across 19th Street at Osdall. I mean, that's a new major street with lots of traffic. I think the green pavement should be across 19th. Also, at Louisiana. I mean, if a car can actually navigate between those bump outs, east to west, that are marked green, I think the pavement marking should be all the way across Louisiana, so it's really clear. As far as deflection at the chicanes, lateral deflection of motor vehicles, there are two places where there's lateral deflection without the bump outs. One is at 21st in Virginia at the high school, and the other is at 13th in Oregon at the Burroughs Creek Trail. I seriously doubt if a motor vehicle is going to willingly deflect when our tendency is to take the shortest distance between two points, which is a straight line. They're just going to defeat those pavement markings and not deflect unless the bump outs are there. Originally they were there and Paul removed them. I don't agree with that decision. I realize we're trying to be within a budget, but I question whether we need to widen Louisiana Street by 3 feet, which is going to be what, $50,000? Why can't we just make it 10, 10, 10 lanes? We stay within the profile we have now, save some money there. And lastly, the cut-through traffic is primarily from 23rd and Alabama, 23rd and Alabama, which then comes up Carolina to 21st Street, then jogs back over to Alabama to 19th. The way it's designed now, it's great. That cut-through traffic cannot happen when they get to 21st. They might want to turn right to get to Louisiana, but they can't turn left on Louisiana. They're going to have to go back to 23rd. However, coming up Carolina, when they get to Griever, they can turn right, go all the way to Louisiana, go north where they want to go. Something needs to be done at Carolina and Griever. No right turn sign, if nothing else. Otherwise, that's an unintended consequence of great treatment on 21st Street. And finally, the no parking question. Parking is only allowed currently on 13th Street on the south side, and on 21st, I believe, only on the north side. When chicanes go in, the parking will be moved to opposite sides alternately, depending. I don't think there may be a slight net loss, but there's not much parking on either of those streets right now, so I don't think it's a big concern. But I think Carolina and Griever is a big concern.
Okay.
And I think the green markings at Louisiana and at, where else did I say, 19th are critical, Adam. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Paul.
Still open for public comment.
Hi, Phil Collison, 933 Pennsylvania, and I'm going to comment mostly about 13th Street. I like that the local traffic can go where it needs to go. I don't fully understand how all this makes things safer other than it heightens awareness of that there's going to be bicycles on the street, and that if there truly is only local traffic and bicycles on the street, everybody ought to be able to get along, and that's a decreased volume of traffic. So I like the soft touch that they did to allow the locals to be able to go where they need to go. I wonder what the impact on snow plows and street cleaners is. We get a big snowstorm and there's a dip in the road, and I don't know what city public works, how that all gets cleaned out. That's really my comments, so.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Okay, it's back up here. Do you all want to comment on any of what you heard here?
We met with our streets crews, and we made some adjustments based on the comments with snowplows. So they're pretty confident that they'll be able to plow the streets as they need to, and they currently deal with speed humps all over town. That's why you make sure they're signed so that they can lift up the blade there, and as needed, some snow may remain in that dip, but they'd be able to clear off the majority of it. Also, some of the locations, like in this little area here, we've talked about whether we do flex posts in this middle or not. The issue if you start putting flex posts in the middle here is they can be driven over, but you don't really want to plow over them. You can remove them in the winter if you put them up. I don't know that our streets crews really want to be removing and putting in flex posts, so we've tried to be thoughtful, had meetings with them regarding the snow removal. The other thing is you probably don't have a lot of bikes when there's a big snow, so if that area stayed not plowed for a few days, would it be a big deal? I think it's something as we go into final design, we'll look at, do flex posts need to be there in the middle or not? We didn't get into that quite that level. We did have the discussions though. So we've tried to make sure we've been responsive to any of their concerns as far as that goes. Trying to think what the other comments were. The green, I think Paul can address. I think he was mainly trying to focus it on places where there was a receiving bike lane. That's where you'll see them. And then, what was the other one, Michael? Griever. We did forget to mention that one thing we are recommending at that location, because we did get some concerns from the high school. There is a lot of students who have a lot of equipment for sports. They can't just walk, so they claim, from the parking lot south to the ball fields. You could argue with that all day. These are athletes, they can walk. But this is what we heard as a concern from the school. They're carrying bags with bats and different things. So we wanted to make sure, and that seemed to be very important to the school district, to maintain that access. What we did want to do because of that was we're going to put a no left turns at Griever and Louisiana during peak hours. So at least hopefully people aren't using that as a cut through. Well, I can't turn left at Louisiana and it's 3:30 in the afternoon. We can put those peak hour restrictions. There's several areas around kind of on the other side of Louisiana that have those hour restrictions for left turns around 23rd. And I've seen police out actually enforcing those in some cases. So we do intend to put no left turns during those peak hours to try to address some of that concern. I don't know if you want to talk about the green pavement.
Yeah, and then he mentioned the bump outs too in a couple places. Yeah, I got rid of those bump outs there. Cost saving feature. And I knew you didn't like that. You told me that you didn't, but that's. So as far as so up here at the top here, like I said, a lot of this is like a palette of artwork for me. So these are chevrons I've got in here. So this has a bike lane. You're dumping right into a bike lane. So this could be a green crossing. Coming in the other direction, as much as I wanted to put green in here, I don't want to have to widen the pavement to get a bike slot over here. So what I did with this is I squeezed this bike slot in there, and it could be 4 foot wide. A bike slot's okay to be 4 foot wide. without cutting back this island. So I eliminated a big cut off this island that you just put in. I didn't want to mess with that if I didn't have to. If I can fit one in coming the other direction, I would rather do that. And then you can get the green bike crossing there too. And I think you'd be happy with that one. But, and when we get into design, so when we start our final design, I'll have our surveyor do some surveys here to make sure I know exactly how much room I got in these really tight spaces, to see if we can squeeze that in. If we can, we'll definitely do that. I think the other crossing was over here on the Louisiana here. There we go. Okay. So, yeah, you could put a bike slot, you can put the green markings this way. This way, you got a shared lane going into the shared lane. I think we could do a shared lane marking across there, and that's totally acceptable to do. I've never seen you know, that green marking used to just a shared lane. It's just, I haven't, and my boss has never seen it, and he's the one that wrote the NACTO guide, so I'm going by my boss. And I've never done that, certainly, but, you know, certainly we can do that, and then we could do a shared lane marking here to drop you into this shared lane here. So there's a couple things that we can add to this. So I like green as much as anybody, and I'll put it as much as I can. If you want to do it, I'll do it, but a lot of cases, it's just a matter of, you know, preference, so. It's not gonna add up, you know, several $1,000s onto the thing.
Sure.
It's not gonna break the bank at all, buying a little bit green, so.
Well, we're gonna bring it back up here, so go ahead, Charlie.
I just have another question, going back to the 19th in Osdale. In this case, aside from the green versus the chevron, can you maybe walk us through like why the rectangular rapid flashing beacons aren't a good fit here? As we kind of, in our community, learn about what's appropriate where, in this case, is this just too big of an intersection?
No, it's a signalized intersection.
It's already signalized,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
So all we're gonna put detection on it.
Okay,
So we're gonna have to change the phasing. So my thought is to do an all bike ped phase
okay.
to simplify it. And that'll get everybody across, all the bicycles and pedestrians moving at
Okay.
once. And they're not, because I know we could split phase it, except the way these bikes coming across into this place right in the middle here, it kind of, you could bring this left turn up. You couldn't really, this left turn comes up at the same time this does. But when we add this bike phase in here, it gets a little complicated because these southbound bicyclists are gonna be going this way, so you couldn't bring this phase up with this one anymore. We're gonna have to think of the signal phasing at this without impacting traffic operations. So bicyclists here are gonna come up, they're gonna come up as sharing the lane here, they're gonna go into their slot, they're gonna activate, they'll come across here and then get onto the shared use path, or they can go onto the bike lane if they want, it's their choice. And then southbound, they would come off the trail, push the button, or actuate it. There's video detection here, so with that addition, we can actually expand the zones for video detection for the bicyclists. Then you don't have to do a push button there, it'll just activate when they're present. We'll just have to put a sign there saying, you know, sit here to activate the signal. So they'll come here, they'll sit in this location, they'll get the signal, and they'll just go right into their lane. Or if I have enough room, I could do a bike slot here and put that green marking that directs them over to the spot. I just have to double check and do a double check on that measurement to make sure I can fit 4 and 4 and 10 and 10, so
Thanks for
28
explaining
feet
that.
in there.
I think this is another example where this likely be the first time in our community where we could have, intersection that's designed for pedestrians and bicyclists to get through first before cars are moving. I think, Kathryn, you were kind of alluding to that in your previous question. So that's real exciting to see that.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I've seen it operate in downtown Nashville. They got scramble phase that, it's all peds. You can go anywhere you want in that intersection.
Yeah.
And that works pretty good unless you're a scooter and you try to go against that rule, and they didn't fare so well. That happened when I was down there a couple weeks ago. A scooter went through the intersection in the all-car phase, not in the all-ped and bike phase, and it wasn't good.
All right.
Okay, back up here. We had a lot of questions, so we've already had a lot of comments. Carol, do you have anything to add now?
No.
Okay. Nick? Got it?
Well, I have a few comments. I think that what we heard a few years back in the Safe Routes to School work was the primary concern of parents is crossing of streets. And it sounds like in this process, the community made the same statement that street crossings are the biggest concern. And so I'm really kind of focused in on these new ways that we're thinking about how we're going to get people across or to improve the safety of those intersections. And I really appreciate the kind of how the tools that were available to us just seem to get, grow bigger and bigger. And, that's going to add some complexity to decision making. Like, when is this appropriate versus that appropriate? How do we create a consistent approach across the city so as we're learning and doing this, we're not confusing people even more? Because it's just, as you're trying to accommodate more users, it will become a little more complicated. It's like throwing in the roundabout. That confuses people. So I think consistency helps with that, and helping, the more, we're going to be the ones that are going to probably know this the best. So how do we anticipate how the community is going to kind of react and say, this is too much? We want to go back to the old days when it was just cars. So that's just as I'm thinking through, like, the conversation our community has had for many years. This seems like a huge step forward in that way. And then I think also getting back to the comment about data, it's great. I think it'll be wonderful when we can look back on this and say, the bike traffic went from X to Y, and we've been able to demonstrate that a bike boulevard has made a significant improvement, for everyone, and especially for people that are on bikes, that people are feeling safer. Whether we hit those measures that are prescribed earlier in the draft bike plan, maybe that's not the right measure in the bike plan to get to this, but this bike boulevard area should see a lot more volume of bicyclists, we would hope. So I appreciate the data that's kind of being considered in the process. That's all I got.
I really can't add much to it. I think this is fantastic. I think rolling it out is going to be a lot of fun. A bike boulevard weekend where you have people, that are learning how to use the bike boulevard, just stuff like that, I think is really going to be a lot of fun. I guess my final comment would be, going from here, just one more time, at this point you go to the city commission for approval, and then it comes back here with design development documents for...
We don't plan to come back. This is a pretty detailed concept design, probably more so than we usually do. So unless we have something that we get into design and something can't happen the way we intended, or there's major changes, we don't necessarily intend to come back. We spent a lot of time on the front end of this project, and we're kind of at the point now where honestly we wanted to be in construction by now. I think it was important that we did the process the way we did, but we really want to push forward from this point and make sure we just move into design and build it. But if there was any big changes that we saw after we went out and got the survey data, I think, you know, you would see it again, but we don't anticipate those things. They've been very well thought out. So hopefully we're able to just proceed, and we can just give you updates on how that's looking as we move forward, so.
Great.
I was telling them, unfortunately, our Bike Boulevard weekend might be February, but, at this point, but maybe we can have the big rollout once it's nicer weather.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, I think to your comment though, the commuting, the safe, confident, capable commuter class that Parks and Rec teaches, this seems like a great place to take people in that class, help, and just maybe even think about other classes where maybe with the high school, where you're getting kids out there to see how you ride, and maybe how it's different with different intersection treatments, and how to make sense of all that. So I think it really is, there is something to the idea, like, we now have something else to help improve education in our community about safe cycling and driving and accommodating cyclists.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much. We can move on to item number 4 on the agenda, the 2019 PED Bike ADA ramp projects. And we are looking to recommend approval of the funding allocation.
Good evening, I am Jake Baldwin, Senior Project Engineer with MSO, and item number 4 is staff's recommendation for allocating the $600,000 for the 2019 sidewalk, bike, ped, and ADA ramp improvement projects. The first of these allocations is going to be the $200,000 for the 2018 sidewalk gaps and ramps and the 2017 CDBG ramps projects. Back in 2018, the Transportation Commission approved these projects as part of the project list for the 2017 and 2018 CDBG projects. And then in February of this year, both the Transportation Commission and City Commission approved the $200,000 allocation. The project was awarded to Phoenix Concrete and is currently under construction. The second part of this allocation is going to be the 2019 bicycle boulevards on 21st and 13th Street, which we just discussed. Just to summarize the financial side of it, there are $330,000 currently available for construction. The conceptual construction cost estimate right now is at $581,000, so the difference in that is going to be approximately $250,000 in additional budget that's required to go to construction. So the staff is recommending that $250,000 be allocated to that piece. And the third and final piece of the allocation is going to be $150,000 to the Safe Routes to School Phase 2 project. Funding for construction is provided by matching KDOT funds at an 80-20 split, with KDOT providing $393,000. The city is $100,000 budgeted for the project, so we've got a total of $493,000. Our engineer's estimate for the project is currently about $149,000 over the available funding limit, mainly due to rising construction costs. In addition, we have associated engineering design fees of $66,000, so that brings us in total to approximately $215,000 that we're short. To facilitate awarding as much of this project as possible with the available funding, we've separated this project into a base bid and 2 bid alternates. The base bid, it consists of 4 pieces. We've got Yale Road on the south, Michigan Street, 15th Street, and Princeton Boulevard. Yale Road on the north is going to be your ad alternate A, and Harvard Road is our ad alternate B. Let's see, this allocation would allow the city to award the base bid plus a possible alternate. The project is scheduled to be let in July, so next month that would be. And following the opening of the bid, the city staff would make a recommendation to the City Commission on awarding the base bid and any possible bid alternate upon the approval of the Transportation Commission. any additional, or I should say, any surplus funds from that project out of the $150,000 allocation would simply be rolled over into next year's bike ped and ramp funds projects. So in summary, we've got 3 parts to the allocation: $200,000 for the project currently under construction. We've got $250,000 towards bicycle boulevards and $150,000 towards Safe Routes to School Phase 2. And that allocation is what is recommended for approval by city staff.
Well, so we've already approved part of this, right?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, the 200,000 that we approved in February for the 2018 ramps and gap project. So,
Okay.
yeah, it's not, I guess we're seeking your approval or recommendation to approve the other $400,000 of 2019 bike ped funds.
Questions, comments? Does everybody understand this? What's going on here?
There are no numbers in front of us. Did I miss something?
It's way deep in the agenda.
Way
Like
deep in the-
page, yeah, 102, way down there.
Okay.
Just,
So this was a word from Kata, a year, like it was a cycle
Yes,
ago, right?
2018. And with the engineer's estimate and looking through the design details, and there's some just some additional things that with retaining walls and tree removal that we feel that needed to be done with the project, kind of drove the estimate up, along with, as Jake said, construction costs are going up a little, and we've been a little more rigid with our contractors on ADA ramps and making sure they get done right, and so we saw that. That was the reason why we saw higher estimates on that last project, and so now we're kind of projecting those estimates to this project, and before we bid the project, we're gonna put in these alternates, so, because I frankly don't think we have enough budget to do all of the sidewalk segments, and we don't want to bid the project and have an all or nothing, so we're taking this approach. If we get really good bids, and a lot of bidders, hopefully we're able to do it all. So this is kind of the game plan, and we may need to tweak it a little after we bid this project and see where the bids come in on these alternates, and then looking forward to finishing the Bike Boulevard design plans, and then bidding that out, which should probably be late this year, seeing where those bids come in and if we need to find any additional funds. But we have, I think, 10% cost contingency in the Bike Boulevard project in that $250,000, and then I think we have some contingencies in this one too, so we're trying to be conservative, but we also want to, before we bid the project, give everyone a heads up on what our intentions are, our thoughts are on where our estimate's at and what the budget is, and then instead of coming to you after we bid the project and trying to figure out what to do. So hopefully that explains a little more in detail where we're at. Again, these are the 2019 dollars. They're $600,000 for the year, and I think these are still, in our opinion, still the priority projects. They were the priority projects that we identified earlier, so we want to make sure we do them and do them right.
So, what about the proposal for the education and the enforcement that Amanda brought? Is that a different budget?
It's a separate program, yeah.
Separate program?
So just to be clear, this is filling sidewalk gaps on the safe routes? Is that, okay. And so do we know which schools these are? I'm just trying to put some more context on it. Like,
Yale is gonna be Princeton.
Can you pull up the map on there? I don't know if it shows the schools on the title sheet, but it'll show the,
Ooh, there we go.
we added the title sheet on there.
So that,
So 15th Street will be Central Junior High.
okay,
Princeton's gonna serve Sunset and West. Pardon me, Deerfield.
Deerfield,
Right.
okay.
And you've got Yale and Harvard are in the vicinity of Sunset and
West.
West. Michigan would be Pinckney.
I think, just comment, as we've seen the safe routes, proposals and all that, just being more descriptive about the whole safe routes plan and the elements that are gonna be built that are gaps might be useful. This diagram is unlike the ones we've seen previously.
Okay.
That'd be another way to explain that. So I
Understood.
think that partly explains maybe some of our, scratching of heads up here.
I had a brief question. I don't mean this as I don't know how to phrase this and not sound kind of negative, but these are clearly the 3 best projects for bike and pet safety, right? What other projects were left off the list because there isn't enough funding for it? Because I know on the CIP, for example, there's like, these are gonna be funded this year, these will probably be funded in the next 3 years, these will definitely not be. Is there a similar hierarchical list for this as well?
Well, we developed a list with the non-motorized prioritization policy, kind of a ranking list, I guess, per se, that we identified a lot of projects. I think there's hundreds of projects, and assigned different scores to them based on different criteria. I don't recall if there was one specific project that was next in line for these funds, but a lot of them all kind of scored pretty high. You could probably pick and choose what project. We kind of tried to take some projects that were a little more economically feasible to do, some that may score the same, one may be a lot more expensive type of project, so we're trying to get some more of the low-hanging fruit per se, for similar scoring projects. But I think as we take the next step after the Bikeway Plan gets revised and start looking at that policy again and scoring that, and then our intention is to get in a cycle where we kind of have a 5-year plan for that bike ped funding and look more out into the out years to be able to see, well, what is that next project? So that's our goal long-term, or I guess later on this year, to start working toward that
Okay, that makes
process.
sense. Thanks.
Why don't we see if we have any public comment, and then we can move on. Well, if not, it's back up here for our recommendation, which I would take now, or we can discuss it more if we need to.
I move to accept staff recommendation.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, staff items, item number 5.
I just wanted to give everyone a heads up that we slightly revised the 23rd Street multimodal corridor study meeting agenda for that study, and we're having another public meeting to kind of kick off that process. And so I think last month we provided an outline of the meetings and times and agendas, and so we tweaked that a little. Jessica put together this update, which is also going on the city manager's report, so just making sure everyone gets this information. And then, Jake just walked out, but in addition to Jake, who's one of our new staff engineers, wanted to introduce everyone to Dustin Smith. He's another one of our new
Great.
staff engineers, and both Dustin and Jake live here in Lawrence and have families here, and we're excited about them joining the team. And Dustin's got a lot of transportation design and traffic experience that he brings to the table, so he'll be working with our team and your team here, all together here, as we keep moving forward. So just wanted to introduce him.
Well, welcome.
Welcome aboard.
Glad to have you.
So,
We'll be as easy on you as we can. Sure.
and that's all we have for staff items.
Okay, thank you. Commission items, it looks like Nick's on.
Well, I reached out to Bob Nugent today, and we have not had a meeting on PTEC for quite some time. But as you may have been following in the news, the transit center was pretty much decided on to be at Bob Billings and Crestline. So at this point, the City Commission has now approved opening conversations with KU about that transit center. So still moving, which is good. And also they have started this year's amenity program, which will consist of the installation of benches at locations that meet the boarding requirements of our policy. There is a kind of a matrix of what it takes to kind of earn an amenity at a bus stop. And it's, I want to say it's something like 25 boardings a day is something like the threshold of what it takes to get a bench or a concrete pad on which to stand. It's, I think almost all of the basic amenities that you would associate with the bus stop up to a shelter, but not including a shelter, start at about 25 a day. So I could be quoting that wrong, but that's what my fuzzy memory of that table shows me. So basically, I think the point that Bob likes to try to get across is that when you see a bus stop that looks like it has nothing at all, that's probably because nobody usually rides the bus at the location, but maybe 4 or 5 a day. And, you know, with the new data that we're getting from the buses, with the new transit operator, we're hopefully going to get much more accurate counts of who's actually using the bus stops. And I believe that's feeding into this amenity program. So I don't want to speak too much on that because that's definitely Bob's area of expertise, but I wouldn't be surprised if you see more, a bit of a rejiggering of the priorities of who gets, which stops get amenities, simply because now we're going to actually have the data to show that, which will be nice. So that's it.
Thanks. Questions for Nick?
I'd really appreciate, I think Bob's been able to come to at least one meeting a year, kind of give us updates.
Yeah.
And if there's a way to, you know, I'm assuming he can do that again and around the time when transit routes are changing and all that. But if we could hear more about the amenities, I think that could be really useful. That's something that feels like it's always talked about in this community and no one has a lot of answers. And so
it's something we go over a lot.
If there's some rules of thumb like that, like you're saying, I think that could be useful to kind of air that out in the public square here.
Sure.
And maybe people would have questions of that approach. So, and it sounds like there'll be better data maybe that might make a conversation like that easier.
Yeah. Indeed. Okay.
Well, the transit hub has been around for a long time, so that'll be fun to.
And the idea of the transit hub?
Yeah.
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 That's
Well, the
for sure.
location, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, it's very exciting to see him move forward. And I think we discussed this at our last, maybe 2 meetings ago, but the particular spot where it's happening is I think the only neighborhood where residents expressed, I guess, support. What is the opposite of opposition? Support. They've expressed support of having a bus station there. So that's great. KU wants it, the city wants it, so I don't know what roadblocks are going to be next, but they seem much more minimized compared to the last couple of locations that we were looking at, so that's good news.
Well, it's almost a non-neighborhood in a way, which is why it was picked.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
What will happen to the Vermont Street activity?
Ideally, it will stop. I mean, that was never supposed to be a permanent location.
Good.
That was supposed to be a 6-month thing until they figured out something else, and nothing ever got moved on, so it remained there for years. Yeah.
Good. Carol?
First, I'd like to make a general comment. I really like what we're doing with the ped bike money because we're taking an approach that impacts large portions of the city. I've always liked the idea of pushing the safe routes to school because every neighborhood has a school. And these corridor projects take up a long stretch and they show the community where their money is going. So that's just my general comment. Now, next, I read the paper and I was reading about the sidewalk controversy. And I'd like to clarify for myself the laws regarding sidewalk responsibility. And tell me where I go wrong on this, but the state has a statute that the property owner is responsible for maintenance and repair. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And the city ordinance merely reflects what the state does. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so what we are doing is we are enforcing a law that we have slacked off on for a long time. We had slacked off on the ordinance and now we're starting to enforce it. Is that correct?
Well, I wouldn't use the term slack, but yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
more rigidly enforcing
Right, being
it.
very
We
lenient.
enforced it on a complaint-driven
Right.
process in the past.
Okay, so in the paper, they kept referring to city policy. What are they referring to when they say city policy?
We have I guess it was in 2018, the commission finally funded the program, so we have an administrative policy, 117, that actually defines and establishes all the parameters for the program. It sets up financial aid, it says what the city is responsible for, it says what the property owner is responsible for, it says that we'll get bids and provide them to those unit prices to property owners, so it lays the whole program out.
So it's kind of an implementation policy.
Yeah.
Okay. Now on to my pedestrian mantra. I was thinking up ideas and what could be low-cost pedestrian efforts, like permitting parking lots so that when they're painted, they paint in a path for pedestrians. Sidewalk to door access. Some of these, we really need to be visiting with the Planning Commission and with Jessica, because sidewalk to door access is site planning. And I was sitting in Perkins, looking out the window, and the whole Hobby Lobby area is being rebuilt. Parking lot's dug up, there's a building going up in front. There's a sidewalk all the way around it, but there's no sidewalk going in. And it seems to me that that much construction would require some oversight, and at that point, we could have had a sidewalk. That would be the third one on 23rd Street that I have noticed. We need to be visiting with these folks in our planning department. And then there's the barn dance. Paul called it a scramble. And this is on the Federal Highway Safety Administration website. Did I get that right? It's on the website, and it has some interesting history. Barn was actually an engineer who was credited with designing this website because he picked up his daughter from school, and it was such a disaster for her to get through all the traffic to where he was parked and waiting for her. And if you look at it further, it said, no, he didn't do that. Well, anyway, there's a long story. One of the first barn dances was in Kansas City. I don't think it's there anymore because I haven't heard about it. One of the newer ones is in State Street in downtown Chicago. And if anyone's ever been down there, you know that pedestrians rule State Street. So it was probably of great relief for the motor vehicle traffic to actually be able to get through the intersections. But I think a barn dance is great, and I think our downtown Lawrence would really benefit from things like that. Where it's already heavy pedestrian traffic, it's something to consider. A dancing pedestrian signal is something else that would be fun on Mass Street. I don't know if you're familiar with those. It's a box where the pedestrian actually gets in and dances, and then the signal light does all the motions. That would be fun. That would be a hoot. I wanted to point out that there are a lot of our neighborhoods that have no sidewalks. And when you think about it, that's the ultimate goal, because all the modes of transportation are interacting. And perhaps there are ways we could protect that and chalk it up for our next gold or silver medal, I don't know. But cut through traffic ruins it, you know, things like that. If we can protect those neighborhoods that already have multimodal transportation, we win. Jessica recently put up web pages, suggestions for pedestrians, cyclists, and motor vehicles. And here's one, Chuck. City vehicle speed policy. Do we have one? What does it read right now?
I can't tell you off the top of my head, but I know we've got one.
Okay, well,
We're supposed to obey all traffic rules.
I know.
Like anyone else.
I'm sure. Usually they're pretty good. If we're talking about lowering speed limits in neighborhoods, how about city vehicles going between 20 and 25 on a local street?
That's what I'm thinking of. Solid Waste has one specifically, and I can't tell you what the speed is, but I think it's set 5 miles per hour below the speed limit, below the posted speed.
Mm-hmm. And even, you know, the police, if they're just cruising through the neighborhood, they could do it at 20 or 25. Public Works vehicles. Okay, those are the, and then I had another note on here. Ground signs can be hazardous. When ground signs are used as the separation between in and out for shopping areas, they block the view of the pedestrian. So the driver who is going out, if the pedestrian's over here, they do not see that pedestrian, and the pedestrian doesn't see the vehicle. So, you know, just things to watch for. I would really like to see us have a study session with MPO and the Planning Department, land use. That's it, thank you.
Okay. That would be kind of interesting to do. I know Aaron and Charlie talk a lot about.
I think I
land
even
use
have that on
planning
the
and-
future list
Yeah.
on the calendars,
Yeah.
so we'll keep that in mind.
It's not on the calendar, but it's on the list, on our to-do list, I think.
Well, Carol, I had dinner last night at the Del Mar Loop in St. Louis, and you don't need to do anything special to get them to dance and have a good time. It's just automatic. So you might see actually a little more of that in Lawrence than you realize.
I just think that would be fun.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you, Carol. Any other commission items?
I have one small thing.
Okay?
I just wanted to point out on the city commission agenda for tomorrow, the staff, the action that's mentioned is to refer the VO Ride Bike Share Program expansion and electric scooter implementation requests to the Transportation Commission.
Oh, good.
And I think, is this the first time, I mean, we have to wait to see what they decide to do, but would this be the first time that an issue's been suggested that it be referred to us? Is that?
Well, I
feel
think
like that hasn't happened yet that I can think of.
for, I guess for a program, yes. I mean, I think they also asked us to look at the bylaws. Other than that, probably as far as policy or
But an issue that's
program.
emerging.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a positive sign. I mean, I think when we envisioned this commission early on, that was part of the thinking, was there should be some issues they want our kind of advice on, you know, and to get them to the point where they're saying, yeah, let's let the Transportation Commission chew on this, and bring back a recommendation. It feels like a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
So.
Well,
just wanted to
I
call
forget
that.
exactly how the O'Connell Road extension went, but it seemed to go back and forth a little bit, didn't it? Between us and the city commission?
The
Maybe
19th
not.
Street.
19th Street
Yeah.
extension.
Extension?
Yeah. So that was, yeah.
I think this is different though, in that those discussions almost had a life, they'd already had they were already kind of, it's like the transit hub. It's kind of alive and just a forever discussion. And so it wasn't in its infancy where it was kind of good to say, all right, let's give this to the Transportation Commission. You know, so maybe it was sort of juggled back and forth, but it feels like they already had a role in it. And in this case, before it gets a life of its own, where they're dealing with it, it's kind of saying, all right, let's send this over. And this might need some additional work and study and some thought put into this. And, you know, we already heard about the electric skateboard issue. So this kind of feels like, oh, now we're going to finally get to try to wrestle with this new emerging mode of transportation. How do we accommodate that? Make sure that they're not trying to cross during the middle of cars crossing, you know, that kind of thing. So feels like a noteworthy step that I just wanted to point out.
I did see a few of the, looked like the electric scooters in St. Louis. Then, you know, I think the bigger cities are, those things are starting to happen. Really are. I was curious about one thing, the letter about the bylaw changes. Has that gone yet?
I think we're thinking July 2nd was the commission meeting.
Yeah.
So it'd be part of July 2nd's
Yeah.
consent, or however it falls?
It's gonna be regular, right?
Yeah, I think we discussed it most likely being a regular agenda item,
Okay.
but it'll be up for the commission to decide, or I guess the mayor
Okay.
sets the agenda, but
Okay.
yeah, I think we anticipate to be a regular item, but should be pretty straightforward.
Right.
But yeah, we're shooting for July 2nd, yeah.
Okay, good. Any other commission items?
I know it's probably time to go, and some people are probably itching to go, but I did have two items that have been kind of burning, and this particular meeting has brought up one of them. I don't have any kids right now, but school buses and school drop-offs are something I kind of think about because I live really near Pinckney Elementary School, and I've driven past many elementary schools, and I, you know, I'm fairly young, so it wasn't that long ago that I was riding the school bus, and I don't, what happened? Why don't kids ride school buses in Lawrence? I'm not from here, so I'm not entirely sure why there's so few school buses, but yeah, so it sounds like it's a money thing. It's also a safety thing. I mean, when you disperse all the kids who are in a single bus, which admittedly when I was young was not a safe bus, I'm sure same with you guys do, no seatbelts or airbags or anything, but at least they were all in the same vehicle instead of each being driven by a parent in various stages of distraction or non-caffeination. Clogging up various streets and parking lots and residential roads. Some places can handle it, some places can't. It takes a lot of work, it seems like, both on, you know, traffic engineers' part and even teachers' part to a certain extent, to make it possible for every single parent to drop off their single child or two kids. And it almost, you know, it makes what was a public transit solution into a private transit kind of dilemma. So I guess I'm wondering, first of all, I'm just curious about the history of that, and I was wondering if that could be some kind of study session item in the future that maybe Ron could educate us about, or whoever else knows a lot about school buses and why we don't have them as much. But B, it brings up a funding issue. So if Safe Routes to School is about keeping kids safe on their way to school, buses seem like a rather integral part of that solution. So I don't know what the restrictions are on funding various parts of Safe Routes to School, but that would be something I'd be interested in checking out as well. Because, I mean, if there be one, you know, almost slam dunk to solving the problem of cars at schools during rush hour, it'd be school buses. So just a thought to possibly put that on a future agenda. The other one I had that is totally different, that's been coming up with all this various discussion about the hub downtown and other new apartment buildings and the parking. Parking doesn't really seem to come under anybody's jurisdiction in terms of a commission. Planning Commission does get it every once in a while because certain developments have parking requirements or minimums that they need to hit. But parking is a transportation issue, not just because you get from place to place, but because the absence or presence of parking affects how transportation happens. It's either a disincentive to drive or an incentive to drive. It can contribute up to what's like 30% of congestion in cities is just circling the block for a spot. So since it does affect our group a lot, I wonder if there's any way, and I don't know if I'm shooting myself in the foot here, of trying to, you know, chomp off a bite of the parking conversation. So I don't know if this has been a thing in the past that Transportation Commission is not old enough to really have much of a past. So I'm not sure where this would have come up before, other than, you know, every once in a while when people don't like a development, so. I'm curious how we can maybe try to get out ahead of this stuff, because it does seem like we're at a bit of a reckoning point where we realize that car-oriented lifestyles are maybe not the most sustainable. And I mean, even our commission is trying to change our name to the multimodal commission, right? So it almost seems like this might be the time to seize upon that opportunity and see what we can do about it before it does become a flashpoint all the time instead of just once a season or so. So anyway, I don't know what to do about that one either, but I was hoping somebody could have a tip on where we go.
I would say, Charlie could probably, the school bus, I know as far as parking goes, there's a huge study done a year and a half ago about parking downtown, permanent parking in neighborhoods, and I really haven't heard anything about that for a long time. I think it's being dealt with within the city manager's office, actually, at this point, before it comes out. But there was I think there was significant public input on parking, a lot of parking aspects in Lawrence. And I'd be anxious to see where it's going, but
That would
haven't
be
heard
under
much.
land use again, wouldn't it? Aren't they the ones who?
It sounds like it currently is, yeah.
Usually comes with a plat.
But if there's anywhere where there's truly a nexus between the planning commission and the transportation commission, it's that, right? I mean, that's basically it, so.
Yeah, I don't think that has a home. And it's one of those,
Surprising.
you know, I think it's done piecemeal when you take the planning commission into it, because they're not thinking about
They're
parking.
using the number of parking
laws.
places based on occupancy, based on square footage.
Right.
That's
Right.
their formula.
Yeah.
They're not gonna like us interfering in their formula.
Although it's almost like seeing, you know, like, say you take the quadratic formula, it's like only evaluating for 2 of the variables, not all of the variables. And I think that's maybe why we tend to run into problems, is because we're approaching a complex problem from a very segmented standpoint.
So I would add one thing to that. So there is a staff group, including myself and a lot of planning staff, that has been reviewing and revising, I think it's Article 9 of the Land Development Code that deals with parking, loading, and access. And we've had a lot of discussions on how much parking is adequate, what the rate should be, and looking at other communities. And even now, as we've spent literally years meeting and discussing this, there's even more things coming out about shared parking and studies. So it's something that planning has taken the lead on it, since it's a code requirement as far as site plans go, or required parking for developments. But it might be something that we could tie in to the study session where we have a land use discussion with planning. We could probably tie that in. So I'll make a note of that. That was a good point, and we'll think about that in the future.
It really has been a lot of years, though. I mean, that Article 9 or Chapter 9, whatever it is, seems like I've heard about it.
We're meeting
I don't know how many years.
monthly or bi-monthly, but
Yeah.
it's a
And there's-
it's a big project, and there's a lot of people
Bike parking
reviewing it.
is
Yeah, there's not a
another
lot of bike
part of
parking
that.
there either.
So I think
We've
this
talked
is,
about
Talked about bike parking before.
well, it gets tied back into this whole revision of the code.
Remember when they put those racks in and some of
Yeah.
those kind of things?
Ron really ought to be here to talk about the school bus thing.
Yeah.
But
That's right
the
before I was
little
about
I
to say.
know is the state does establish rules for when the school district has a responsibility to provide bus service, and it's 2.5 miles is the distance. And so it's quite a, I mean, it is,
That's wild.
it really does mean most kids aren't gonna get bus service in this
Especially because
town.
elementary school districts aren't that big.
Right.
So, I mean, is it possible then to go above and beyond what the minimum requires if you wanted to do? Yeah, so if we
I
had
mean-
state local school money.
Yeah, I think that's where you get into thinking about how does transit become a lifestyle choice for even younger, age
Yeah.
patrons. So I know with my daughter, I feel like at middle school, she ought to be ready to use transit. And if there were a place, I think that would be a good sweet spot that gets kind of beyond what the school requirements are, to how does this community support getting kids to school or other destinations. It would be to kind of build on what's already started just recently with, essentially now for $30 a year, your child can ride the bus.
Yeah.
And you gotta buy that 3 times. I mean, I think it'd be nice to just say, let me get an annual pass. How do I get my kid to be trained to do this in school, not out of school? Because as a parent, I don't have time to figure that out myself and then to figure out how to get my kid to do it. So I got to carve that time out so that she feels confident and I feel safe to let her do that. So that'd be a great conversation with the school district.
That'd be a good thing
Or with
to
Ron.
bring back to Public Transit Advisory Committee as well, because if it happens on public buses, then if education is the issue, then
You can
that's
pay
us.
for it, but the pass is kind of the way to go.
Okay, folks, how we doing?
I'm good. Thanks.
You know, I have one thing that didn't come up in the earlier study session, and I'm not sure where it goes, but it's kind of just recognizing that what we heard in the Bike Boulevard was that the route that's being preferred doesn't extend all the way to Iowa. So then, I know Jessica's not here, so I don't know if you want to pass this on, if it's already been thought about, is in the preferred, or the priority funding network, the blue zone between Osdale and 19th, and then all the way over to, I don't know if that's, not sure what street that is on Clinton Parkway, but it kind of begs the question, like, why would we prioritize that if the Bike Boulevard essentially is turning north to go to 19th? So there's a pretty large section there that feels maybe less of a priority from decision-making being made around the Bike Boulevard. I don't know if you guys, like at the staff level, had that discussion, but maybe it needs to go to yellow, or just not a priority at all. Because I don't assume we'd want to fund something that doesn't really have staff's, recommendation for that Bike Boulevard route.
Specifically, is that 21st from Osdale to Iowa?
Yeah, that, and then on her map, it shows going down to 23rd or Clinton Parkway in Iowa, and then cutting over to Clinton Parkway. So it's just a segment that feels like if you're gonna cut out this part of the Bike Boulevard, then you might as well just say, that's not a priority. Just that little jog there. What is the priority is to make sure everybody's getting, from the Bike Boulevard up to 19th and then down to down to Clinton Parkway by way of this, crossing
Yeah.
path.
And the segment there along Iowa Street's really kind of already built. There's a shared use path there, but I think the intention was that at some point, if there's additional development at 21st and Iowa that necessitates a traffic signal, the Bike Boulevard would be extended.
Ah, okay. That would make sense.
Yeah, so I think
If we
that's
can get
the reason why it's still shown on there.
Okay.
That makes sense.
And we just
Yeah, if we
added
can get
that,
intersection-
added that
traffic light.
segment
Yeah, they
up to,
Yeah,
Okay.
they did.
up to 19th and Osdale. It's more of an interim improvement until,
Well, maybe it's
That could
considered
be
a secondary funding network, like one that gets greater consideration if there is development on 21st Street, but
we'll
I
talk
guess
to
I'd
her
like
about
to
it.
think that we would recognize that it'd be more important to fund the segment cutting across campus than it would be to fund anything else right there. Because that's a huge, getting the east and west side of town connected, that feels like a pretty important one, especially going back to the demand map we looked at on the task force. That whole area through the campus is a huge part of the demand, so if there's a way to prioritize that over that other little segment that may depend on a traffic light one day, seems important.
Okay, everybody, should we move
That's
on
it.
to calendar?
Yes.
And, is that mine or yours?
Oh, it's either of ours. It's all of ours.
Okay, well, you
Yeah,
can
the next
start.
meeting is Monday, July the 1st. Study session, we have the non-motorized project prioritization to begin discussion on that, revising that policy, and then regular meeting agenda. Tentatively have the approval of the Lawrence Bike Plan and be pending Jessica getting the comments wrapped up and any revisions needed to be made before that, in time to make that July meeting. And then we have the information on regulations for non-vehicular transportation devices. And we may also try to tie that into the discussion with the VO ride and the bike scooter, so that could kind of
Yeah.
all go together if it gets put together in time to make the meeting. So that's what we're planning on to this point for July.
Okay.
Could
The
we-
study session should be a good discussion. There's been a lot of people that have talked about how to improve that. So,
For the August 5th study session, would that be a good spot for the update from transit? No, I'm just thinking of their routes, that they usually get updated around that time. It's just blank on our agenda.
So it's just a blank right now. Be a good spot for school buses. Yeah, I can talk to Bob about that and see if he wants to, just to see if that is an option, if you want.
okay. I think we're there. Anybody like to suggest we adjourn?
I would motion that we adjourn the commission meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.